Happy Raksha Bandhan. Wishing you all a very happy Raksha Bandhan. I'm sure some of you are, finding it a bit difficult to attend for different obvious reasons. But let me share that if you would have postponed it to next week, then also we would be having problem because 15th August is a Friday, then you have an extended weekend, people would be traveling. And then 25th being the last date of submission, it would have been really difficult to incorporate, assuming you would be willing to incorporate some of the things that you are going to learn in today's workshop. This annual workshop, which we have just before the actual conference, is something which we have, and we feel that some of the young scholars, especially in the initial years of research, are going to benefit from the expertise of the people that we bring to the table, obviously online. I'm very glad to share that today we are going to have three speakers who are going to present on different facets of research as far as conducting research in area studies is concerned. And in this case, we are talking about China studies. What would be a better way to start the proceedings than to have China expert who is with us, that's Professor Usha Chandran, who's going to tell us how one can dig deeper using some of the primary sources, secondary sources, and what are some of the outlets that one should be looking for if you are conducting research on China studies. Before I ask Professor Usha to come in, let me very briefly introduce her to you, assuming that you don't know about her background. Uh, Professor Usha is an assistant professor at Jawaharlal Nehru University and honorary fellow at the ICS. She holds a PhD from JNU on gender studies. Her major research interests include gender issues in China and comparing gender issues in China vis-a-vis India. She also likes to explore in areas related to how there is an interface between gender and language as well as popular culture, women's subjectivity in literature, and exploring sociological methodologies to study the Chinese society. Her latest publication is a book, which is titled Gender Discrimination at Work in Urban China. And she's currently working on an edited volume titled Gender in Language and Expression. So over to Usha. Usha, please step in and please share your valuable insights. So as shared, 35 to 40 minutes we would be allocating to each of you, followed by Q&A. And assuming our participants are not stoked enough to have Q&A, maybe you would, do the honors of encouraging them to ask some more questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Professor Venkat. I think it's a honor to be called for this methodology workshop, because last time also I think I had a very good experience, and this time looking at some of the papers, I think that there's a huge change and good progress even among the papers that I saw. It was very interesting to see scholars exploring new and unexplored areas. So I don't know, the topic says that I'm going to look at methodology to looking at the Chinese studies. So I will not promise anything more than what I'm equipped with. So I'm looking at exploring methodology to research on Chinese society and culture, and that is my that is the area where I've worked more, and of course the language part will also be there. So this is something, starting from the obvious, that methodology is very important, like the significance of studying methodology in studying China. Like, it's not that we have to follow a methodology, and usually it is the researcher's guide to approach the study, and constantly guides the researcher to recognize and formulate their research questions, inquiry, hypothesis, subsections within the paper, and if it's a thesis, then chapterization. So it also tells us what can be used for our particular study and what can be discarded, because every study is different, and as you go along, you might realize that in the beginning that some data is very important, but as you go along, you are much equipped to select and discard with the materials that you have. And that for that, the methodology is very important. And generally, it is felt that methodology means method. I should have a method to basically how I'm going to explore about China. But the significance of theory in methodology is very important. So method is what we follow, but theory is what we mean. So therefore, the term methodology has been increasingly understood to be beyond method and be inclusive of all tools used for research. So it gives us an understanding of the overall approach of the thinkers to the issue under study. And while research methods are concrete techniques or procedures one plan to these are the methods I'm going to look at, whether it is materials, whether it is data, but the approach that we are going to look at, that is the research methodology, which include describing the approach, the strategies, or the plan that shapes our choice. But use of a particular method or a form will also, the theory is a very important part of that method. So it includes, spelling out the rationale to take up this approach, or, take up this research, and also the approach that we are going to use for this research. So theories play a very important role in putting the socio-political facts into perspectives and contexts. Social and political theories have evolved and emerged in abundance in the past 2 centuries. We all know that. So they describe the universe, and because the universe is constantly changing, therefore the theories are also constantly evolving as the society itself is evolving. So with the new understanding that sociology is a science of the society, it can be validated with data, facts, and figures. The qualitative study were started being substantiated with quantitative data. Therefore, research on society, therefore, should be critical of social conditions where oppression and inequality prevail, and it should emphasize whatever is unjust social conditions and propose liberating alternatives. So social and political theories allow researchers to comprehend and describe important processes, since it's a set of eyeglasses for seeing the reality that are significant for the society and for understanding the society, given its time and place. So when the researchers follows a research idea, he or she would start with certain assumptions, that how and which theories can be related and contextualized. As you go about, you'll find new theories, or which is more apt to your research. So you have to apply these theories to the research ideas. And so the theoretical perspectives is brought into play into the social and political phenomenon. Thus, theories help a researcher to comprehend the social phenomenon and build a strong foundation for the research. A lack of theory would invariably lead to ushering of personal biases and prejudices, running down the authenticity of the research. So in recent past, it has more or less been unanimously agreed that the moral biases of a researcher should be completely held back or neutralized. Thus, it has been a major issue of debate and discussion throughout the history of evolution of social and political science research as to how important it is for the researcher to learn to unlearn. So it is a known fact that all researchers are, located in a particular space and a moment. So therefore, the moment they start their research or the quest for research, there is a particular construct that they are coming from. So they have a commonsensical view and ideas, which could be biased in some or the other way. So based on the researcher's own reality and experiences. So this is common to all. Therefore, no one starts with a blank slate, they say. So moreover, many a times, owing to the fact that one is part of a society or is a keen observer, so it is often taken for granted that the legitimate ability to explore, and it's taken for granted that one has the legitimate ability to explore and the social political issues therein without any prior training or research. So this approach invariably encompasses personal biases and prejudices. So therefore, the method and approach employed is also corrupted. So it has come to be recognized that common sense ideas obstruct one in theorizing and conceptualizing the socio-political phenomenon. Besides, it also becomes an obstacle for the researcher to view the primary and secondary data and materials objectively. So for the question then remains that how to break away from this commonsensical view and get rid of the preconceptions? How can one articulate based on theories and conceptual analysis to follow the innate and deeply constructed structures of the society? The dichotomy between theory and practice so leads the researcher to find himself. So if you immerse yourself in theory, that's when you find the path of your method. So, having to choose, so that's how you'll be able to then perhaps choose between choose to balance between the qualitative and quantitative material and vice versa. So therefore, one has to go through the process of unlearning and constantly be aware of one's biases. So when we look at China, so what are the considerations? Now, coming to China, what are the considerations that one should keep in mind while looking at China? So there are several conditions when one approaches studying a society. The when, why, and what of the theme requires careful application of the concept of shaping qualitative understanding to quantitative materials and vice versa. So while approaching the study of Chinese society and politics, along with methodologies, an in-depth study on the history of China is imperative. Political science and sociology is believed to be imported into the organizational and the knowledge of China from the West. However, a grasp on it in the Chinese context, right from its inception, like the American missionaries when they came to the 19th and 20th century, the signification of disciplines during the 1930s, and its competing status with Marxism and subsequent abolition of Western theories in post-liberation era, to its re-establishment in the reform era and exploring and with its opening up. So when the theories and the Western theories once again flourished in post-reform China, with its openness of questioning with globalization and to the cultural cultural nationalist efforts to revitalize tradition as markers of identity in the past decade, especially. So an understanding of this lays a firm foundation for an effective study on the Chinese society. Important questions on how class, status, bureaucracy, capitalism, gender, poverty, religion, and philosophy, family and power works in the Chinese society have come to be seen as the fundamentals of doing sociology in China or looking at the politics of China. So when we look at what are the methodologies, a study on Chinese society would first require to bridge a gap between Western theories and Eastern social thoughts and philosophies. So while theorizing their understanding on Eastern societies, a researcher would accept the Western theories, which evolved in a different plane as it is. It is very difficult, rather which one should not accept the Western theories the way it has been conceptualized in the West as it is in the context of China. Rather, one should blend it with the historical experience and memories, as well as Eastern embeddedness and location. So the failure to view China from this angle. So when we say Eastern embeddedness, we should not understand that the Western theories would directly apply to the Chinese reality. We should try to blend it with the Chinese realities, that is the Eastern embeddedness of philosophies and history and mindset, how the social mindset work. Because as per the social mindset, the political setup also works. So the failure to view China from this angle may lead to false interpretation and misgivings on China in the contemporary world. Similar to every other society, Chinese society also carries features unique to itself. To understand and study them, it is imperative to understand its social causes and consequences of human behavior. So there are some basic principles that is followed by every Chinese as part of a collective consciousness of the society. These are deeply influenced mainly by Taoism, Buddhism, and Confucianism, the three pillars of Chinese philosophy, they say. So as well as then in the post-liberation social transformation, as well as the reform and post-reform developments. So all of these factors play an important role in forming the collective consciousness of the Chinese people. Now, Taoist characters are, characteristics are claimed to be peculiar to the Chinese. It has exercised considerable influence on the development of Chinese culture and psychology. So it focuses on harmony, genuineness, longevity, health, immortality, detachment, etc. While Buddhism, the only foreign religion which took firm roots in China, brought in the spiritual and ritual path of life. So, what is the the meaning of existence and the rituality of the daily ritual practices. However, we all know that it is a Confucian doctrine on the way of life which claimed to largely guide the material life of the pre-modern society in China, following which the influx of Western ideas and communist revolution, which disrupted the existing feudal social stratification and raised the social status of the deprived. Now, one of the pioneer sociologists of China, Fei Xiaotong, in his book From the Soil, it's called xiangtu zhongguo. So, he tried to create an understanding of the Chinese society as early as 1930s. So Fei and other sociologists had identified that the sociological theories derived from the Western society carry basic assumptions about people, which cannot be applied to understand China. So as per Fei, it is important to identify the quintessential Chinese nature. And some of them, being China follows a collectivist culture, sorry. And the only prerogative of self is self-cultivation. So when you're talking about self, it has to be self-cultivation, which is typically catering the group, the others. So, thus group interest is always placed above self-interest, and individual desire necessarily seen as selfish and origin of evil. So the idea, this is as completely in contrast to the Western idea of individuality. So the idea of selflessness is one of the oldest values in China, presented in Taoism, Buddhism, and Confucianism, which was later also echoed in modern China through Marxism. So therefore, self-interest is quite unacceptable in traditional as well as present-day China. So self in the Chinese society is deeply embedded in social relationships and is emotionally tied to personal obligations defined by those relationships. Now, with the above mentioned idea of grouping, self-interest brings us to the basis of Confucian representation of keeping the family at the core or at the center as a centrality in the Chinese society. So each familial link is specific of a social relation, role carrying the obligation of reciprocity. So everyone has a reciprocal responsibility. So thus, every individual is the center of a social circle with his or her relations with others, so which are hierarchical in nature and conduct. So all major relations in China can be roughly understood through this prism. So number one is the relation of the ruler with the subject, that is people to the government. So it legitimizes power relations between people and the government. So it demands loyalty of the people to its ruler and the sincerity of the ruler of always having people's well-being in their mind in all their policies and actions. And number two is the relation between father and son. So this just not only signifies the father and son, it signifies the relation between elders and youngsters. So the obligation of all the youngsters of the society to follow and be filial towards all the elders, in the entire social network. And third one is the relation between husband and wife, which signifies subordinate status of women to men and the need for every woman to be obedient to every man. So this establishes the gender power relations and legitimizes its hierarchical nature. Now, through this prism, we can see how the system of moral governance is established. And in this whole system, the individual is subordinated as the Xiao War, the lesser self, as against the kinship network of Ta War, that is larger self. So the self is further reduced to his or her obligation of reciprocal relations and exchanges based on mutual favors with others in the society. So this system re-emerged and flourished in the market economy setup, where self-interest obligations were made to work through the Quanxi network, through contacts. Now, individuals do not choose, as they cannot walk in and out of a relationship or of a social network of social ties, a network of social ties. It contains no sharp boundaries. So somewhat similar to the kinship network in pre-modern China. In today's China, it also largely works based on the brief categorization of 5 human relationships, which is called Ulun. So that is love between father and son, role distinction, role distinction. That is that men and women are different, so their roles are also different. The roles of husband and wife, precedence of the old over the young, faith between friends, and duty between ruler and subject. So at the core of these relations is the concept of filial piety. Therefore, the traditional Chinese family helped the children to mature into adults who are more firmly tied to maintaining the continuity of the family. Thus, unlike the West, where the parents are bringing up the child to be on its own, but here it's exactly the opposite. To be part of the family tie or the kinship. So thus marriage in traditional Chinese society hold the sole purpose of producing male heir to continue the family line. So with this modern monogamous marriage system, there are not too many changes, including son preference, division of labor, etc. So the traditional Confucian idea on faith and trust among friends was challenged by post-liberation concept of comradeship, that was Thongzhi. So literally meaning common will. So one that should be felt for all. But after the market economy, earlier concepts of friendship re-emerged in renewed ways through the concept of quanxi. So a relation in which one does a favor to the other as a social investment, expecting the favor to be returned at an appropriate time. So modernization of economy and infrastructure led to a dramatic social change due to which people are enduring increased pressure and risk. They're bound to work overtime or even leave their family members behind and work in different cities and provinces. So in addition, the cost of marriage, parenting, and education is increasing them dramatically. Thus, in constant to a typical modern society, which we would have expected that after a reform, China would become a typical modern society with nuclear families. But in contrast to those expectations, the role of family, because of the above reason, as I said, the role of family as well as Quanxi network outside the family in terms of individual protection, cooperation, and support between generations has become indispensable. And thus, the concept of family and kinship has come in a new package. So it in itself, it is gaining strength rather than, so family in itself is gaining strength rather than becoming frail. The need to link these sociological findings with historical and current policies and economy, politics and economy, sorry, of the region is a must. So therefore, we must look at that how the society has shaped up. What is its historicity? So any discipline cannot be observed in isolation. One cannot apply interdisciplinary approaches. One has to apply interdisciplinary approaches to study these societal phenomena. One cannot look at it in isolation or in a monolithic way that, okay, I'm only covering this area, so I should only cover this and not look at the other factors. But you must look at the other factors which is actually impacting the social phenomenon. So combining economic and political changes with society changes is a necessary, is quite necessary for exploring the multifaceted nature of social issues. So through the collective common consciousness or memory of the society, there is a need to link the sociological findings with the realms of collective consciousness of the society. So thus understanding the rhythm. So there's a rhythm in a society. So rhythm of the collective beliefs, notions, ideas, language practices, aesthetics, regional differences, regional sentiments, and religion. All of these is imperative for an effective analysis. Now, one of the main tools for doing an in-depth understanding of the Chinese society is the Chinese language, which can open several doors for the researcher to easily permeate into the society. A study on China would require both interpretation from Chinese language as well as interpreting the inner meaning or the implied sense of the language, which is mostly socially constructed and culturally situated. So when we read a material which is in Chinese material, which is in Chinese, then it is not only enough for us to understand what is written, but also to understand what is not written but implied. Because I mean, here I can give you an example where, there was this report during COVID that, men are joining hands, or are as, as strong and as useful for the COVID fight against, sorry, women are as useful as the men to fight against COVID, and they're going hand in hand and fighting against COVID. And this was a report on many of the nurses going to Wuhan, and they were shown shaving their head and everything. But the truth is that what is not written there, which if you are someone who's been working on China or looking at China, observing China, that 99.9% of these nurses and the doctors, those who were sent to Wuhan, were actually women. So what is the whole, it's actually quite ironic to say that women work hand in hand with men to fight COVID, because these many are sent to. So we should know the implied meaning, and that comes only with the knowledge of language. And also, obviously with the knowledge of language and the learning of language, one will also learn the society and the culture that comes with it. So therefore, knowing the language as well as the culture is imperative. It goes a long way to understand and to research on China without knowing the cultural givens, because when we learn the language, we also learn the cultural givens, because in the language, within the language, there are usages, proverbs, there are certain words used for certain purpose. We all are constantly using, even in Hindi, more. I mean, we can relate this more to the Indian languages, because when we know Hindi, we also understand the values and the culture and the mindset of Indian people, or at least the North Indian people. So without knowing the cultural givens, the mindset and the mindset of the people is very difficult to understand. And because there are so many hidden sense implied within the language. So even when we talk to the Chinese people, there might be something that they're saying, but there are also certain things that they don't say directly, but they imply. And so therefore, it really helps that you know the language. Now I'll come to the second section of this paper, which talks about Chinese culture. Now, how does the Chinese culture and the way of living, how do we, understand or work on as a research subject? So culture can be, all of us know, I mean, there are so many definitions. Culture is a very complex kind of concept, and it's very difficult to understand or define culture in words in its entirety. So, but briefly, we can define it as a set of practices, beliefs, and most broadly shared trend of social structure, which are commonly accessible cultural experiences and attitude that exists in the society. So, similar to other societies, Chinese society also carries an underlying culture. However, the concept of popular culture. So, when we are looking at Chinese culture and popular culture, so popular, how does it differ from culture? And it's extremely complex, because when we're looking at the differences, it becomes more complex, and therefore it cannot be defined in one way or the other. So, contrary to general understanding, popular culture was not just the result of industry. I think generally we understand that popular culture is the culture which has been followed by more and more, the maximum number of people, or the majority of the people. However, popular culture is a concept which came after the industrialization and commercialization. So it was popular. Culture that was used became popular culture with the help of media and dissemination of information, and print media started. So historians cannot deny that, even though some historians say that popular culture started after industrial commercialization, but others also say that we cannot deny that pre-historical societies did not show signs of popular culture. Whereas some scholars critique all of these, defining that, claiming that it does not apply to pre-industrial and pre-capitalist society. So it is believed that popular culture in pre-industrialist and pre-capitalist society mainly constituted culture on religion, beliefs, and customs, which were commonly followed by among the larger people public. So existence of popular culture, even before industrialization, is debated among scholars. Rather, it is claimed that emergence of mass culture, so as parallel to mass production. So earlier, before popular culture, it was mass culture. It was followed by people through the word of mouth. And it was then seen that with industrialization, the idea of mass production came into being. So with the mass production, the emergence of mass culture also was conceptualized, a phenomenon which created the technique of profit making through mass production. So for a mass public consumption. So this led to the popular culture. So if there is a product that was, a new product, then it will be mass produced and it will be mass distributed, and therefore it will become a mass culture to use that product. And therefore, then the popular culture becomes a popular culture. So being defined, so this is somewhat been understood that what is popular culture. So meaning that the popular it was popular before turning into mass after industrialization, owing to use of different forms of media, starting from print media. So while the concept of popular invariably refer to something which is common among majority of the people, social sciences focus on culture being represented through languages, religion, customs, beliefs, times, and spaces of different groups. So therefore, it can be explored ethnographically and statistically. So as cultural symbolic idea, Confucianism has been idealized, defied. So to begin with, it was idealized, then it was defied in between with the influx of Western ideas. Then it was dismissed, then it was vilified, and it was then now we can say that it has been rehabilitated. In the last 1 millennium, it has gone through all of these phases. So in short, it has deeply influenced the people's way of life and culture for centuries. So owing to these complexities, its interpretation, both in terms of its definition as well as adaptation of how it became part of daily life, has varied enormously over the years. So given the long history, Confucianism has played diverse roles in forming the common traditional culture in different settings and time periods. So thus one can easily conclude that the ideas and ways advocated in Confucianism, as interpreted by people in different times, became the common traditional culture of majority of Chinese people. So here we can say that Confucianism is the common traditional culture of majority of the Chinese people, especially the Hans. Now, how did the folk culture, we all know that every region has their own folk culture. How did that folk culture engage with popular culture or the common traditional culture? Now, throughout history, Han Chinese have been expanding themselves. We know that they have been expanding and they have been amalgamating themselves with other nationalities and but owing to the social, political, and economic needs, there has been a constant need to amalgamate or change themselves or, adjust themselves in new areas. So, however, it was with the confrontation of the Western powers. So, when the Chinese confronted the Western powers, it was at this time that the Chinese people suddenly became conscious of their national identity. There was no idea of national identity before that. The idea of national consciousness or ethnic identity as belonging to people from the same region, as different from people outside, was developed with a recognition based on similar cultural practices. Therefore, it can be said that the Chinese people are composed of numerous elements which are pluralistic in nature. However, one can observe that throughout Chinese history, the culture of the elite tends to bypass or suppress or blend in with the folk culture to establish the norms of culture of the masses, which in turns form the popular culture. So though folk culture got mingled with popular culture at large, it also managed to maintain some of its uniqueness and coexisted along with popular culture in several regions. Therefore, some unique and distinct feature of regional folk culture is also retained to a certain extent in far regions in China. In the past few decades, we all know that there have been efforts to preserve the unique identity of ethnic minorities, and how the government is taking care of them and also showcasing them as a as a means for tourist purposes. And so, however, we know that it is also ridden with political and economic factors. So with the entry of Western culture into China, the Chinese culture underwent several rounds of challenges. So the first round of influence was with the influx of Western ideas, when Chinese culture came under the influence of liberal nationalism. This was followed by the Marxism, the Marxist, revolution, and later with the Maoist thought, which challenged the traditional Confucian culture in a revolutionary way and led to the Communist Revolution and the subsequent isolation of China by the world. So, in the post liberation China, the CPC led by Mao continued to spearhead the culture of revolution among the masses for building the Chinese nation. So as to bring about revolutionary changes. So everything has to be revolutionary. The culture of revolutionary was promoted. So this culture outrightly rejected the traditional Confucius values, rather promoted a Marxist path to liberation with the party as a vanguard. The revolutionary spirit of building a Chinese nation in the form of mass culture, the culture of mass production, mass education, mass media, mass collective cause, and mass dressing. Everything was mass. So even everyone has to look alike, and men and women also have to be looking alike. This was a phase when women were also felt guilty of being women, in the sense that of being overtly or seen as women. So they had to hide their physical appearance also in this dress. So everybody was considered as a mass collective, and that also created a level of equality. So this mass concern, which was based on a community practice with common goal, formed the basis of popular culture during Mao's period. So the culture of common cause brought the people together and stimulated the feeling of harmony and humanness among them. However, the chaos and confusion of the Cultural Revolution led to the degeneration of cultural consciousness among the people, among the masses. So nonetheless, reform and opening up to the outside world, followed by globalization, challenged the earlier ideas of Marxist modernism. Western influence of China became more widespread. And this was something which could neither be ignored nor be completely accepted by the Chinese people at large. So as a result, the need to preserve the Chinese culture was increasingly felt. So it gave way to a need to relook and revive the Chinese culture. So therefore, there was a need to, revive the Chinese culture. Albeit the looming fear of, there was a looming fear of also relapsing into the earlier Confucian ideology. So as one of the Confucian scholar points out, that the danger of relapse into a backward gaze reflects the epochal, unconsciousness of the historical bondage of tradition, within which even the most revolutionary fields of modernity are embedded. So therefore, parallelly, there was this danger of going into the bondage of tradition. So with globalization and the growth of internet, the 21st century influence of Western culture reached its peak. And that was very, cautious. The government took a cautious stand on that. So then that is when the government started re-emphasizing traditional Chinese socio-political thought, with Confucian idea as being integral part of it. So the re-emergence of the idea of harmonious society by Hu Jintao tend to indicate that it was centered around, so the harmonious society of the traditional China was centered around maintaining a social harmony by managing the conflicts between individual and the interpersonal relations, which was followed by the norm of the three fundamentals we just discussed, the three fundamental relations of bonds. Now, I will just conclude here that, how has the Confucian idea when we are looking at Chinese society today and culture, we have to look at how has the the Confucian idea of five bonds and five virtues, the larger self versus lesser self, establishing and maintaining quanxi, that is relations or contacts, gifts and favors, losing and keeping face, etc., being followed in the contemporary society. The popular culture in China today has been shaping up as a result of the historical evolution. So, theoretically, if we view Confucian thoughts as the cultural genes of the society, then as per the changing times, the gene itself has underwent several changes, which are suitable to the outside world, thus making it imperative for us to study the transformation of Confucianism and the concept of post-Confucianism to understand the Chinese culture. Now, there is I don't know if I have time. Snigdha, do I have more time?
Uh, Usha, I think we need to wrap up so that the participants get some time for Q&A.
Yes, yes. So, what I'll do is I have just given a case of aging population uh, and just trying to say that if we are looking at aging population, how do we incorporate the whole argument that I have been making into this case of aging population? Just for the for an inference. So putting the above argument into perspective. So one example of aging population for China's official data claim that in 2017 the proportion of Chinese citizens above 60 reached this much, and so increasingly the aging population is increasing. The research on this will entail the socio-political, cultural, as well as political, socio-economic, cultural, as well as political aspects which lead to such a scenario. So it will also include academic discourse, media, literature, and language. So it will require looking up demographic studies on the data, which points out, for instance, that the country will enter an era of negative population, and in-depth study on the social structure of the Chinese culture, which I just mentioned, the Confucius principle of filial piety, respecting one's elders and paying respect to one's ancestors, the Buddhist idea of karma, so on and so forth. So all of these was expressed that the Chinese are expressed in Chinese language through proverbs, popular sayings, daily usages, and literature. So the study of these factors will show the depth of familial and social relations in Chinese culture, the collective consciousness and memory of the society, which forms the culture of the people, as I just discussed, naturally obligates the young to be responsible towards their parents, and the old feel vulnerable and dependent on their children, not on the state. So, however, one cannot overlook the contrasting phenomenon of youngsters choosing to lying flat, which is again a new phenomenon, which is contrasting to the earlier mindset of the younger being filial towards the elder and the elder being dependent. So the new phenomenon of lying flat and eating onto the elders, how to contextualize this with their different upbringing and construct, this generation's different upbringing and construct, as well as their changing cultural values. So it will be interesting to explore how this generation is different from the earlier ones, especially as a result of one-child policy. So in this whole equation, people's mindset and in-depth cultural beliefs enables the state to amply justify their negligible social security system and politically driven policies like the one-child policy, which forced a few generations to have only one child. So there is a need to understand the theories behind these governing bodies being compelled to impose its power on to control its subjects, which even so when it comes to even in all the aspects, but even in the aspect of natural procreation, the state represents its masculine power to use the feminine body to procreate. So when Mao Zedong encouraged the population to multiply and create manpower, to controlling when Deng Xiaoping introduced the one-child policy to curb China's rapidly growing population, one cannot fail to miss the gender power relations in this also. So being androcentric government and the genocentric feminine subjects. Thus, one goes on to review the problem of aging population with the enormous financial stress it is causing on the working population and in turn to the economy. Finally, viewing the impact of aging population on the economic growth of the country. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Usha. That was really fantastic, especially the last few minutes of whatever you presented. How do you apply what the background which you built in context of deeply focusing on one area? And you took the example of aging population, and you have shown how researchers can look at that problem from multiple perspectives. So I would now like to invite the participants or prospective participants in the conference to raise their queries to Professor Usha. please raise your hand, and then I'll call upon your names to, you know, to address your query or clarification or your doubt or whatever it is to Professor Usha. Yes, anyone, please? Okay. Okay. K.K. Venkatraman wants you to name the book. Usha, you mentioned about some book in the early part of your lecture. Usha, you're in mute.
Yeah, I'll just type it out.
Yeah.
So it's called From the Soil in English, and in Chinese it is Xiang Tou Zhong Bo. So there is an English translation also. This, I don't know. I think it should be available. So basically, the book actually talks about how the Chinese people are coming from the soil. They are connected to the soil in the sense they are basically farmers. They're basically peasants, and like in Hindi, they say "mitti se jude hue hain." So uh, that does not just necessarily mean that they are peasants, but it means that they have a cultural or a civilizational history of uh, culture of uh, coming from the land, or using the land for as part of their life. So basically, when urbanization happens and farmers are actually asked to move away or given other kind of employment or means of earning, they are not able to. It's very difficult for them to live in flats and above the land. They wanted to be connected to the land. So that's, of course, Wei Xiaofeng wrote the book even before pre-liberation, but until his death, he's been working on. Uh, he's a renowned sociologist working on sociology of China. Yeah, there's a question I think here.
Yeah, Usha, yeah, so the question is by Mr. Vivek Kelkar. He is asking, could you give some insights on how does one apply the Guanxi concept to China and its role in the dynamics of the global economic network, especially in the ASEAN region? Now, you, I mean, you can answer this question, but I also thought since no one is asking, was wondering whether you can throw some light and share, some insights regarding what are the various, sites online and, uh, how does one access to the possible extent some kind of a genuine information on China. So those who are fresh into China studies, first year PhD, second year PhD, still very much in their infancy as far as conducting research on China is concerned. How do they go about, supporting their arguments? Because not everyone has the benefit of Gestor and EBSCO and all that. And many of our papers, the reviewers have said that there is lack of primary sources, there is lack of secondary sources. But we also need to understand that many of the researchers, especially in tier 2, tier 3 cities who are aspiring to do well, but they just don't have access, to JNUs and IIMs of this world. So how do they go about dealing with this challenge?
So I think as for the using the primary source, they should actually look at more Chinese sites which are there in English. I mean, which they have the English translations, or on a regular basis, they also come out with English versions. Like Paper CN has an English obviously not everything that is there in Chinese is covered in the English part, but at least you do get a lot of materials, English materials in paper CN. And Sixth Tone is also a very important resource, because Sixth Tone is constantly reporting on social issues. But what is happening is that so what is interesting is also that the Sixth Tone, most of the uh, contributors for the Sixth Tone are actually Chinese, and young Chinese who have who are either based in China or outside. So it's very interesting that how many of the things that are not easily available or are not available in English, in the Chinese English websites, are spoken or discussed in Sixth Tone. So and sometimes you wonder how is this happening, because and they're not monitored much. So I think they are also used as a window for the foreigners to understand China, and to also not also understand that there is some kind of autonomy given to the to the Chinese media or in Chinese English media. It's just that the Chinese media which are connected to the government will not have that autonomy, or will not. So it's very interesting. Like Sixth Tone is a very interesting source, primary source. But of course, if you're talking about research, then there are, I don't know, like there are a lot of research done by Chinese scholars, which I think is very important to look at. So those who do not know the language, so I don't know how. I mean, if they can, because I will not say Google Translate, because actually, when it comes to reports translated into translated through Google Translate, it is still not so not so away from the actual language. But when it comes to research papers, I think Google Translate is not so effective. But one can try. But without knowing the basic language, one cannot even look at or explore what can be used. So I think some level of language knowledge will enable you to at least mm, know how to look for these things, and whether which of the article or the research material is useful for you. And in that way, then you can perhaps will also be able to slightly understand when the Google Translate makes a mistake. So I think I don't know. I mean, I don't know actually how to actually uh, effectively look at the primary source without knowing the language. But these are the things you can play around.
Right.
Still, I would say learning the language is very important.
Yeah. So
And
there,
to some extent, at least, if you not learn to a very high level. Yeah, sorry.
yeah. So there are some questions. People have now been hooked basically with your presentation gradually. So Vivek's question, how can
Yeah,
you
yeah.
apply 𝐂𝐿𝐶 concept to China and its role in the dynamics of global economic network,
Yes,
especially in ASEAN?
that is it's very important, as I had said in my presentation also, that how even to look at political and international relations, or how China is playing out its policies with the other countries, it is important to know the Chinese mindset. So it's a very good question, in the sense that you are able to then link to this 𝐂𝐿𝐶 network inside China. Also, that how China then, if you are a keen observer, an IR student, you will also see that how China maintains a 𝐂𝐿𝐶 outside China also. So that is the Chinese mindset to have to first establish and then maintain the relation. And it is like as I said, that it is like investment, investment of goodwill. So they invest and they do goodwill for you so that you get something in return. So that definitely the internationally with relations also, they tend to work this way. They tend to create a relation and then try to maintain it by giving favors and gifts. And then expecting it in return in some other ways. This is a typical mindset. And I think this is also a typical mindset in diplomacy. So you give favors, and you give at least 1 to 3 favors because you are the higher power, and then you expect 1 favor. So I think this is how the equation works.
So Usha, Nishtha has been waiting for quite some time, raising her hand. Nishtha, please come in and address your query.
Okay, am I audible?
Yeah, you are.
Thank you, ma'am, for your insightful lecture. And I have a question regarding the way you mentioned if we understanding any phenomena, we should conceptualize based on Chinese social and their culture. But my question is like, if I'm comparing China and the Western country, like for example, if I'm comparing China and US, how should I be cautious to avoid the Western concept? And for example, if I'm especially studying the Western driven idea, like for example, I'm studying quantum or semiconductor. So how should I go back to the Chinese tradition and Chinese social understanding of these terms, because these idea is driven from the Western perspective. So how can I avoid these things so that I can be neutral in Chinese understanding of this idea?
Yeah, so it was not clear. If you're studying on what? Western?
Western driven concept, for example, emerging technology,
Yeah.
semiconductor, quantum. So, how do I understand the Chinese perspective? And how should I go back to the tradition of Chinese concept?
Yeah. So to understand that, you have to see that, in China, how from the time the technological development has started, it was mostly politically driven.
Okay.
Technological development were politically driven. It was initiative of the government, not the private businessmen like in other countries, because for profit purpose. Because politically driven means the profit making purpose will also be by the government. So the government will actually mm, formulate a plan and
Mhm.
then bring in the private or the other stakeholders, which is perhaps different from other countries, right? In India, perhaps it is the Tata and Birlas who will actually conceptualize this and would like to, have their own technological whatever experiments or research. But in China, it is government sponsored, and therefore it is all ultimately it has to cater to the needs of the country or the government, or that is where you must look at it differently. So to do that, you have to see the evolution of technology. When did that happen in China, and how did that work? How were those projects taken up? And look at it as a complete separate. So therefore, comparative study. When we do comparative study with China, we have to look at China. We cannot think that okay, we have done study on US or India, and we know that what is the situation here. So parallelly, we just look at the current situation in China. That is what usually people do. They just compare the current situation without looking at the history, how the current situation has come into being. There's a historical path which it has followed. So whichever field you are working on, look at the historical path. And the mindset, the political mindset of the people is also related to the social mindset. Political mindset of the government is related to the social mindset. As I said, the greater self, it's a collectivist society. They will always think about the greater self, not about one businessman trying to earn as much profit as possible, which is not politically allowed, and socially also that's not the mindset. But that does not mean there is no corruption, or there is no that people are not like people like Jack Ma is not there. But largely you have to show the collectivist purpose in the public domain. there has to be a collectivist purpose for all kind of development, all kind of technological innovation. I don't know if I made myself clear.
Yeah. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so
So,
much.
Usha, we are running short of time, but one last question from Malika, which I'm sure will evoke an interesting response from you. See, Malika asks, how do we look at the revitalization of folk religions and folk religions and folk beliefs in relation to the identity of the indigenous people in the peripheries and their larger place in neoliberal society?
Yeah, so basically, as I said, that the folk religion has always blended with the elite religion or the region, the ethnicity or the culture of the larger or the elites, whoever comes and settles, whoever is economically more powerful to have to help or to have the connection with the rest of the world. So that is how then they will profit. But I mean, mm, there are a lot of discussions going on within China. There's so many sociologists and there's so many scholars who actually say that the biggest mistake Mao did was recognizing these ethnic minorities. And some say that because Mao recognized these ethnic minorities, now they have to be kept in a certain way, but they cannot completely also maintain their own ethnic uniqueness, because if they do that, then they cannot come in the political setup or the political kind of framework that the Communist Party had created. So this has always been a debate, because to bring them completely into that national kind of setup or under the party committee and at the village level, county level. So to bring them completely there, it was very difficult, because they will not, their way of living is different. So it's a constant debate going on, and therefore the government then gave them this, power to have to maintain their own cultural identity. But increasingly, there is no way for them to, maintain their cultural identity, because they have been constantly exposed to the Han culture. There are Han schools, Putonghua schools, they have to learn Chinese. Now their language is dead almost, and their way of living is getting blended with Han. So there is always the popular culture which influences the folk culture. So, and the only slight remnants of folk culture you can find is for the purpose of tourism, and more of showcasing that we are maintaining a unique folk culture. I don't know if I answered your question. There are other
Yeah.
questions also, I think.
Yeah, there are other questions, but I'm afraid, we are running short of time.
Yeah, so I'll write
S-
my email ID here in case anyone wants to get in touch with me.
Yeah, that would be nice if some of you can, get in touch with Professor Usha and our other resource people as well. And I would encourage, or I would request to participants in this, research workshop to direct your queries, in general, but particularly with focus to the paper that you are going to
Yeah.
present. If you have other queries as well, they're most welcome, but you can sort them out by directly emailing. But right now, the purpose is to sharpen your paper a bit for the conference. So if you can raise questions in terms of how does research methodology, how do I bring in that element which is missing, those kind of questions, if you come up with, that would be better. With
Mail me these questions.
Yeah, we'll mail. Thanks a lot, Usha. Thanks a lot. And now I think it's time to move to our next speaker, Professor Ajit Phadnis. Professor Ajit Phadnis is, my colleague in the HSS Humanities and Social Department in IIM Indore. Ajit completed his fellowship FPM program in public policy from IIM Bangalore, where his doctoral research was an effort at make melding the academic streams of public policy and political science. Prior to his doctoral degree, he received a management diploma from IIM Bangalore and a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering from IIT Bombay. He has 4 years experience as a practitioner of public policy, working in the varied capacities of a consultant, a policy advocate, and a researcher. During his fellow program in management, he was awarded the Fulbright Nehru Doctoral Research Fellowship to pursue a portion of his doctoral research at Duke University in US. His research interests include comparative legislatures, legislative politics, political parties, and business politics linkages. As shared earlier, he's going to speak on research methodology and academic writing. In IIM Indore also, he takes courses which are focused on research methodology. So therefore, I thought Ajit will be the right person to guide you all who are going to present your papers in the conference to help you sharpen that part of your paper. Over to Ajit. Yes, Ajit.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Venkat. And I would like to thank both the coordinators of the conference, Professor Venkat as well as Professor Arvind. Is my voice clear? If you can just confirm that. Yeah.
Actually, it was a bit shaky, but now it's fine.
Okay, okay. So far it was fine. Suddenly I thought, I'm just hoping that it stands. I mean, maybe along with other people who are on holiday, even our internet should not go on leave, hopefully. Yeah. But thank you. And thank you to Dr. Usha for a very enlightening earlier talk. And I learned a lot because honestly, and what Professor Venkat would have highlighted, that my background is not primarily on China, right? But of course, I'm a social science researcher. So I would imagine that many of the discussions that I would bring about would be broadly relevant to research in general and will try to be more methodological in focus. And so it may seem a little bit pedantic or very kind of mechanical compared to the earlier rich theoretical discussion that you had. But I'm hoping that it would equally relate to some of the submissions that you have made. And so, yeah, so with that, I would begin the discussion. Yeah, and let me just share. I've prepared a few slides. Yeah, could you confirm whether the slides are visible? Yeah. Could anybody confirm whether this? Yeah, yeah. Okay. So thank you. And so I just wanted to, start talking about research by trying to get parallels with a very, very fun journey that I have. And, usually I like to climb mountains and I do that once a year. And so somewhere I also view research, as a parallel with this because I see research is also as climbing a mountain because climbing the mountain is not only the outcome that is important, but also the process of achieving the peak that is important. If I say outcome is in the case of research is to finally get a publication, that is of course a pleasurable moment. But the process of research is equally, kind of a very interesting and enriching journey. And so I see research from both these aspects. And all the time we cover one peak, we are trying to then move to the next peak, right? So we do one piece of research, and particularly for early career researchers, they do one piece of research and then they are trying to move to a more rigorous piece of research to improve themselves, to develop as better researchers. And so that also has a parallel with climbing a mountain. Yeah, so I thought it's a nice analogy that I like to bring about. So I think, yeah, so I just want to lay out some foundational principles so that we can, move forward. Yeah, research is all about exploring curiosity, right? And Professor Usha pointed out there's so many different theoretical lights by which that we need to explore. And the world around us is full of curious and interesting things that are happening, right? And all the more so, of course, in the last 1 year, but you have so many curious things that are happening. And if I have to, because I'm a political science researcher, if I have to, uh, bring parallels with how international relations looks at it, I think there are some very interesting, occurrences that are going on. Democratic states supporting authoritarian regimes, right? Everybody talking about climate change, but nothing much happening on the ground. Free trade countries that are now moving towards protectionist policies, and countries that trade heavily with each other sometimes are engaging in conflict. Some authoritarian regimes are permitting elections, some democratic regimes are backsliding, right? So a lot of different interesting developments are happening across the world, which of course piques the curiosity of researchers to get into some of these interesting questions. Yeah. So at the end of the day, of course, research is all about data. So what I like to explain to participants in my courses is that, yeah, in research at the end of the day, right? Unless you're God, other than that, if you're a researcher, then you have to bring data to kind of support your arguments and a hypothesis that you're moving forward, and that's what makes empirical research a very distinctive area of investigation. Yeah. Uh, the question, what is research? And I will draw from what Dr. Usha has very rightly pointed out, right? That research is somewhere it challenges common sense ideas, right? And that's a very important part of research, that it should challenge what humans uh, used to perceive earlier, right? And this is a very interesting diagram that I've drawn. I mean, so from a natural way in which the humans would look at, they would perceive that it's the sun that is, revolving around the earth, right? But it required a very scientific mind to actually prove the contrary, right? That it is the earth that is actually revolving around the sun and not the sun that is revolving around the earth, right? But common sense will tell us that, yeah, it's the sun, because that's what we see day in and day out, that the sun is revolving around, right? And that is where, the essence of research comes in, that the most exciting pieces of research are able to challenge some fundamental, theories, some fundamental assumptions that we have carried all along. And that is the pleasure of being in this entire enterprise. Yeah. But if I have to point out three different key attributes of research that we should all incorporate at a very conscious and subconscious level as well, I would say that every research exercise has to be systematic, right? So there should be, thinking about the problem. What is it that we are looking at? What is the kind of phenomena that we are trying to investigate, right? And then get into, what is the kind of theoretical frame that will help us investigate that. Then in getting to what is the methodology, I think Dr. Usha rightly pointed out that methodology and theory can't be looked at in isolation. They kind of blend and merge within each other and give powerful effects through that interaction, right? And so methodology is an important part of that. And then, of course, you go on and actually carry out the research, do the document analysis, do the survey, do the experiment, do whatever, the methodology that you have kind of, proposed to do, get the results, right? So it has to be a very systematic kind of enterprises that what we are looking at. Yeah. So the second part is about research is that research needs to be objective and non-biased, right? So, and this is yeah, easier said than done. I think Dr. Usha also pointed out that research has to be reflexive, right? You have to think about what your position is in the research is. Uh, but sometimes the biases are unconscious, right? Sometimes the biases are conscious. We can account for that. Sometimes biases are not unconscious, and so I usually point out, just as an illustration of a case where a bias is unconscious, right? So when I ask the participants, right, which of these two lines, line A or line B, is longer, right? Inadvertently, when people have not seen the case, they will say that line B is longer, right? And so that points out to sometimes we can have unconscious biases. Unconscious biases means when we are going for an interview, right? What is the dress that we wear? What is our style of speaking, right? All these things have very unconscious effects on what is the non-verbal cues that we are giving. All these things have very unconscious effects on the person that we are interviewing, and can therefore influence the kinds of results that we get. And being conscious of that, and some things we can account for, some other things we can't account for. So at least kind of being honest and kind of reflecting that these are the things that we can't do anything about, is an important part of the research enterprise. And the third part of it is rigor. I mean, how rigorous we want to get in terms of our research. And I would like to point out that unlike the first two, the first is systematic, the second is bias. Rigor is something that we can decide on, right? So some researchers want to be very rigorous with their research. They are very ambitious about their project, and so they go on to do very rigorous research. Some researchers, right, given the time and constraints and the resource constraints that they have, may want to have a systematic research, right? But they are very conscious that and unbiased research. But in terms of rigor, that is something that they have to see to what extent they can carry on. Right? If I can give an example of a quantitative research that I usually carry out, the sample size is a good measure of rigor. Right? If I don't have enough resources, I'll probably go for a unbiased sample size, but which is lower in number as compared to a more rigorous research where you will go for much larger sample size in your surveys and things like that. Right? So this is a decision that one has to take with regard to research and that. So moving on to the next section about how to conduct research, right? And this is not something that I'm sure even early career researchers are very aware of some of the steps of research, but just for the sake of being systematic myself, I'll point out what are the steps. One is to identify and define what the objective of the research is, right? What is the problem or phenomenon that we are trying to explore, right? The second is to identify the theory that would go on, and pursuant to that, what is the kind of research design, right? Where so would it be a quantitative research which is better suited, or is it a qualitative research, right? So that depends on what is our ontology and the epistemology that surrounds the research. And then, of course, to move in and prepare the research instrument, talk about what kind of data is required and the data analysis and the final reporting of the research, right? And so this is a standardized kind of research methodology framework. But research can be of many types, and I'll talk about three, broad varieties of research. One is an exploratory study, right? If something, suppose there is nothing much done in the field, right? So early researchers in the field would want to come out with some exploratory studies on that field, right? And so those are kind of exploratory studies. The second is descriptive studies. Once again, it's an emerging piece of research. We are still, getting a sense of, what is the new phenomena that we are talking about. For example, if you're talking about emerging technologies, like how, artificial intelligence affects some global aspects, like how artificial intelligence affects democracy, right? Those are not fields that have been extensively researched because they are still emerging fields. So we are still in the descriptive phase of research. And then, of course, you move towards causal kind of studies, which says that, okay, we are trying to find out the relationships between two variables and what is it that, leads to this relationship. And so these are causal studies are generally recommended for research areas where there is extensive amount of research that has already been done, right? And so we know where to get the data from and trying to understand interesting questions. Yeah, but I think it's important for every research to have that causality in mind about what is the phenomena that we are trying to explain, right? And what are the factors that help explain why this happened, right? And so it's important to have that somewhere in the back of the mind and try to understand the causal factors that are leading to that, because at some level they can explain why certain phenomena occur, but they also have an instrumental purpose in that, for practitioners, if you conduct causal studies, that helps them in predicting things in future, right? And so since we are of course talking primarily about international relations, I try to explore some studies on international relations which tie up to some of this. And I found this interesting study, uh, which is trying to, look at a causal kind of a relationship, argue about the rigor or not of this research, but certainly there's a causal question that is looking at, right? And the causal question is that they are looking at the effects of President Donald Trump's Twitter messages on the US stock market, right? And so there's a causal relationship because we are looking at the effects on the US stock market, and then we are looking at the cause, which is the effects of Donald Trump's Twitter messages. And so this is an interesting example of a causal research. Yeah, let me stop for a moment here, right? And if you have any questions on this discussion on descriptive, exploratory, descriptive of causal, I would be happy to take, or some of the earlier parts that I have covered so far. I'll just stop for a moment, and if there's anything that you found interesting or you wanted me to elaborate more, I would be happy.
Yes, please. Anyone would like to step in and raise a query regarding whatever has been discussed till now?
Yeah, so that's fine. So then, of course, please feel free to drop in your questions on the chat box as well. And so, I would be happy to take questions on the go. Professor Venkat, am I audible? Is that there's no internet issue? I hope.
Yeah, largely you are fine, but once in a
Okay.
while, we have a problem. There is a drag.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, let me see. Maybe I'll also have a backup connection in place. So let me move on to this discussion on uh yeah. Yeah. So let me move on to the discussion on methodology. And so this is the different kinds of research that we have, right? One is the exploratory, which I would recommend should be primarily qualitative, because if nothing is known on the field, it's very uh, premature to go in for quantitative studies. So I would say exploratory studies and descriptive studies should largely be qualitative to some extent. Descriptive, you can still include some quantitative studies. Causal studies can be a combination of both quantitative and qualitative. And there's a new realm of emerging talk about mixed method research. If anybody is interested to look at different techniques of mixed method research, I would be happy to highlight that in the question answer session. So So, what are the common challenges that we find in research methodologies, right? And I'll talk about and Dr. Usha talked about proposition and hypothesis testing, right? And this is, of course, that's how your research is conceived of. You start with a hypothesis, right? You start with a proposition, which is at a slightly more abstract level, and then you go to a hypothesis, which talks about what are the ways by which you can measure what you have talked about, or the concepts that you have identified in the proposition, right? So, for example, in the earlier example, of how Donald Trump's Twitter messages affect, stock markets, right? We have a clear hypothesis, right? That, you know, uh, uh, maybe positive messages, I don't know if, yeah, may affect the stock market positively, but negative messages may affect the stock market negatively and so on. So I'm trying to, yeah, talk about it in a very non-judgmental manner, right? About, because research in general, at least from the positivist paradigm, we are trying to understand phenomena, like, rather than trying to make a judgment about whether what we are investigating is right or wrong. That is, of course, something that we will conclude on post us, achieving the findings that we are. So, an example of a proposition is that democracies are less likely to go to war with each other. So, this is a hypothesis. It may be an interesting hypothesis to look at, but how do you then operationalize the research? You operationalize the research by collecting data for a particular period. So, the hypothesis says that we have to collect data for this particular period, that is between 1950 and 2020, and we are looking at pairs of democracies, and we are saying that, and we are going to measure how frequently are wars between pairs of democracies as compared to wars between a pair of a democracy and an autocracy, or a pair of an autocracy and an autocracy, right? So you can see that, the hypothesis brings out a way by which we can kind of conduct the research, right? And then, of course, an important part of the research is, once we get some sense of what is it we are trying to analyze, we go into the mode of literature review. And literature review is basically you standing up and making a point, right? You're in a group discussion and you're just standing up and putting your hand up and trying to make a point. And this analogy with a group discussion is useful because we understand that we have to first demonstrate that we have listened to others before we can expect that they would listen to us, right? And so that's the essence of a literature review. The essence of a literature review is to first tell the group of scholars that you are writing to that you have read whatever relevant is there to read about the field, right? And that is an important thing to demonstrate in your literature review. But being more specific, I would say that the literature review should have uh, should kind of evolve over time, right? And I try to give the example of how airplanes have evolved over time, right? People have learned from each other, and through this learning process, they have created better planes, right? And if we can use this kind of a metaphor to also analyze how we should look at research, right? We are looking at research in a particular sphere, right? So we should try to build on earlier researchers, right, rather than try to start from scratch, right? So if you want to build a new airplane, it's not particularly a good idea to put wings on ourselves like Wright brothers did when they were trying to first discover the airplane, right? We should learn from the earlier researchers, and that should be the spirit of any that is an important principle that we should follow. But as we are writing the literature review, the literature review should have three very distinct parts. Yeah, and the first distinct part of a literature review should be to highlight why is it important to study this piece of research. Why is it important to study this particular subject, right? And why is it of interest to the scholars that you are going to speak to, right? In your paper, why is it of interest to the scholars that you're going to speak to, and why is it of interest in general to a more general audience, to people in general? Why is it of importance to them? So I think the importance can be highlighted in two ways. One is by pointing out that there is a good amount of scholarly work in that area to show that that area is interesting. but also to kind of tie it up to some contemporary events that have happened across the world, and to say that, yeah, this is a contemporary event, this has happened, which is why it's interesting and important to study this research. And earlier scholars have also found this to be an interesting area of exploration. Those are two kind of important strategies that you can talk about for why it is important to study this piece of research. And then to identify very clearly what is the gap in this particular research. What's the gap that you're trying to address in your particular piece of research, right? So this gap could be theoretical, right? So it's just that earlier theories had talked about something else, but I believe there's a different logic for this, right? There could be a new theoretical contribution that I'm making, right? That could be one kind of a gap. There could be a new methodological contribution that I'm making. Earlier researchers used qualitative research, and I'm trying to bring in quantitative research, right? I'm using survey data, somebody else used something else. So to kind of identify the gaps in the earlier research and try to explain what is it that you are trying to bring new to your research. A third could be context, right? So in the context of people who are studying China, maybe earlier researchers studied mainly urban China, but they didn't look so much at rural China. And so these are the interesting new aspects that I'm trying to bring in my research. Right, so identifying the gap and positioning your research. How is my research attempting to do that? Right, so identifying how I'm attempting to do that, and why is addressing that gap important? Right, being very clear about why is studying rural China important? Why is challenging this theory important? I think those are, why is this new methodology important? I think those are the things that one has to bring out very clearly in the literature review. Right. So I wanted to bring an example, and I would thank the coordinators for giving me an opportunity to read, to go through some of the important China journals. So this is from, I think, the China Quarterly, right? And this is an interesting piece which has come out very recently, right? And it talks about the rise of the Chinese judiciary and its limits. And I wanted to highlight that, just reading the abstract will give us a very good idea of what this research is about, right? So this research in some ways is contrary to conventional wisdom, because it challenges wisdom, because uh, uh, you know at least the perception, I mean, as Chinese scholars you can highlight the details, but the perception is that in a slightly authoritarian regime the judiciary will have very much leeway, right, in creating, in having independent judgments. But this research says that, yeah, well, maybe broadly so, but there is a nuance to it. And so they bring new evidence from court cases, right? So judgments made in recent court cases to say that the win rate of the government has actually gone down. Earlier, they were, or the people opposing the government has gone up. So earlier, plaintiffs used to win 33% of the cases, but now they are winning 42% of the cases, which suggests that maybe there is some evidence that the judiciary in some pockets can actually give independent judgments and so on. Right. And so this is an interesting thing which challenges the existing perception and the theories of how we may look at the Chinese judiciary. Right. And so this is an important contribution. Then, of course, methodological issues would arise. I don't think I have enough time to highlight, but questionnaire design is a very important methodological, skill that we need to pick up, right? And in each of these questions, there is some fault or the other, right? And there are different faults of questionnaire design, right? And given time and a more kind of a, if there could be more participation, right? I would have liked people to identify. Even now, if you can identify some faults in each of these questions, right? You can put that in the chat box, and it would, yeah. So each of these has a set of problems in the questions, right? And questionnaire design can be an important element. Right, so that's a separate area of study of how do you design good questionnaires. there are problems of double barrel questions, there are problems of leading questions, bringing emotions in questions, that the response options are not exhaustive, and so on and so forth. Right? And then, of course, there are challenges of sampling, right? And sometimes our samples are not, very representative if we talk about that. Right? I'll give you a funny example, and that's not about China, but about India. So, so I'd asked students to, do a survey of the youth in Indore on climate change, right? And then I asked them this thing in the class in the morning, and then whatever, I was free in the evening, so I went to the local mall, and then I found a bunch of my students in the mall conducting a survey of students, of people of the youth of Indore in the mall. And I asked them, is this a representative sample? Right? And some of them were not aware. They said, yeah, I mean, you asked me to collect a sample size of 200. I've collected of the youth of Indore who are in the mall, right? And then you then question them about, okay, is it really representative? Are there groups that will not be represented in the sample? Right? So are we going to underrepresent, right, people who are not socio-economically well off because they will not be going to the mall? Are we going to be regionally focused and not regionally diverse in our sample? So there are key questions on representativeness. And this particularly occurs a lot because a lot of people conduct online surveys, and online surveys can be terribly biased, right, towards people who are technologically proficient, who own better phones, and so who come from economically better off families, right? And so understanding whether the sample is biased is an important aspect. The second thing is about understanding whether people who have not responded, right, also why did they not respond, right? And there's a very interesting story about World War II, and where there was a research which was done by the U.S. Air Force about where do planes get hit, right? And so what they did is that uh, they analyzed planes that are coming back, that came back safely, and they try to identify where were the places that these planes got hit, so that they can put an extra cover on those places, right? And of course, scientific thinking would say that, yeah, this has a bias because you have excluded the sample of planes that did not arrive, right? And probably the sample of planes that did not arrive were hit in exactly the places where these planes were not hit, right? Probably they got hit at the engine, and so that did not come back, right? So understanding why there are non-responses is equally important than as when you understand, when you get responses, right? And so this is something that I want especially survey researchers to be very careful about, to not only look at respondents who have responded, but also consider respondents who have not responded, right? Because there's a lot that could also tell you about why somebody didn't respond. Yeah. Uh, I would, broadly summarize, but the analysis is also can be complicated, and and I want to talk about a certain hypothesis that could be made, right? And a particular graph which says there's a strong correlation between U.S. foreign aid and political stability in a country, right? And so one could make a conclusion that it is US foreign aid that is bringing rise to political stability in a country, and interpret this graph in that way. But there could be a reverse directional view of this as well, that that high political stability in a country can lead to higher US foreign aid, right? And so these are the problems with interpreting data, right? We are very sometimes we immediately make we are very hasty in making conclusions that one variable is leading to the other, but it's possible that the same correlation can be found because the second variable is leading to the first, right? And trying to understand these reverse causality threads is an important aspect when we are trying to make findings and interpretations of that data. Yeah. So, so I would broadly conclude and I would invite questions so that I've kept about 15 odd minutes for that. This is a very fascinating paper on which analyze textual data. And the hypothesis of this paper is that did the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948 contribute to constitutional development in the period after that? Right? And so they are trying to highlight this. It is from a top international journal, World Politics, and so they do a textual analysis of the UN Declaration of Human Rights and the textual analysis of the constitutions, and they try to identify the similarity between the two documents to make a conclusion about whether the UN Declaration contributed to some of the constitution making that happened. Right. So this is also a very interesting international relations problem, and which was kind of handled very rigorously in this particular. Yeah. So lastly, I will give about 5 minutes to writing a research paper, and so writing a research paper would have generally 7 or 8 parts. Right? So the first part, which I think I missed over here, is the title of the research. Right? The title of the research is something that when you send it to a journal, the reviewer sees the title of the research first. Right? And so the title of the research should be appealing, but also grasp the crux of what you're trying to say. Right? And that's why, we can have some discussions on the title of the research if you wish. Right? And so that's a very important thing. So usually people who try to write papers sometimes start with writing the title of the research and the abstract of the research, right? Because writing the title and the abstract gives structure to what you're writing further on, right? And this is an iterative process. I'm not saying it's a serial process, because you start writing the title, you start writing the abstract, then you write the paper, then you say, okay, this is something interesting that I found. Then I revise the abstract, right? So it's an iterative process, but I think it's and scholars over time have kind of also emphasized that it's nice to start with the title and then go to the abstract and then kind of think about the keywords, right? And then start writing the research, because the keywords are what will position your research clearly in the literature. Yeah. And then, of course, we have discussed about literature review, hypothesis, the context of the research. I mean, if it's China, then talk about the context, the periodic context in which, if it's rural China, it may be different. If it's urban China, the context may be different. Talk about how you brought in the data and methodology. Talk about the findings and the discussion section. Yeah. So today morning I did some survey, and I found out an interesting, paper that I thought we can discuss, and which will highlight some of the paper, uh, points that I try to make. Yeah. Yeah. So this is a paper from China Quarterly, which is once again, I looked at the latest issue and I saw things that, would broadly gel with what I can explain from a research methodological framework. So, so this is a paper on anti-corruption efforts, corruption perception, and public evaluation of local governments in China. Right. So I think it's clear, because it's an evaluation and public evaluation, which will tell you that it's a survey. It's a survey methodology that they have used, probably, right? And it's on corruption. It's on corruption perception. So these are the questions that they have asked in the survey. And it also tells you the context, local governments in China, right? So it tells you a little bit about how carefully they have, looked at how to, create this thing. Then, of course, you can go down. You can look at, the abstract, and the abstract will first tell you why this research is important, because there have been efforts about corruption, uh, but there is a gap. So certain things remain understudied. So this is the gap in the literature. Then the data that they have used over here from 2010 to 2018, and the additional analysis that they have done, right? And then they have talked about what are the findings, and the last is what is the implications of the research, right? So this is a very standardized framework of writing a paper, where the abstract tells you one line on each of the different sections of the paper. And then you go down to the introduction, right? And the introduction tells you why studying corruption is important, right? That's the first paragraph, right? And then it talks about corruption and public attitudes. That's the second paragraph. The third paragraph talks about previous research and what the previous researchers have done and not done. That's the third paragraph. And what am I doing in my research? This research aims to do the following, right? And so this brings out the fourth paragraph, which talks about a word which is called contribution, right? What is the contribution of your research to the larger literature, right? And I thought this was so they have highlighted that my research makes 4 contributions. I thought this was an interesting kind of template to highlight the points that I made. Then they talk about the theoretical analysis that Dr. Usha had highlighted. Bring in the theoretical part over here. What's the theoretical frame that I'm using? And talk about the hypothesis at the end of the theoretical frame, right? So the hypothesis comes at the end of the theoretical frame, right? Then it talks about research design. What is my source of data, right? And then it talks about what are my measures that I'm using. Then it talks about what is the analysis method, right? And then, of course, it brings in descriptive statistics, right? Descriptive statistics, a tabular representation of the relationship. And then, of course, if you're familiar with regression, right? So they use a regression model to do that. Then there are robustness checks. So if you're familiar with regression, they'll use first level of regression, then robust models of regression, and then it'll kind of move forward. And then what are the findings of the study? This comes here, right? What are the findings of the study will come here. And then what are the discussions and conclusions, right? So this summarizes the findings of the study. And then it goes on to show, okay, what is the new knowledge that my research is adding to the literature? What is the new knowledge? How does it connect with other scholars and what they have found, right? That's an important part of the conclusion section. And largely, what are the limitations of my research? What is it that I have not covered in my research? And the last point is, what are the future research prospects that could emerge from that, right? So I was asked to highlight a little bit about paper writing, right? So I hope that through this demonstration, I've been able to highlight some of the broad things. Of course, these days, many journals do highlight that you should also bring out a separate section which talks about the practical implications of the research. Yeah, and of course, the limitations. Okay, so I think I would leave some time for questions. I have finished my presentation. I would look forward to it. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ajit. That was a wonderful, introduction to the world of research. So I would request the participants now of this workshop to address their queries to Professor Ajit. Please feel free. Just raise your hand and you can shoot your answers. Your questions. Yes,
answers are welcome
Sanu.
as well. Yeah.
Yeah, Sanu. There are no answers to questions in research.
That's of course true. So yeah.
Yeah, Sanu, please.
Hi, sir. Thank you. It was very practical and very effective. I really enjoyed it. I just want your actually a question or a comment you can take, but I want your input on where should we situate the use of AI in your research designing, because it's not something that we can avoid in this time. Like it's the increasing use of AI, whether doing the research design or brainstorming with AI, or how should we use AI in this thing. And second thing, I want to ask, like you were mentioning about the use of variables and the results it can influence. Like, for example, if you're taking the question of how to measure the prosperity of a country, there will be multiple variables like maybe GDP or disposable income or the human development index. So, for a single study, maybe everything can't be included. So, how do we justify this? If for my research, maybe I can say I'm just using the balance of payment and GDP, the economic indicators, and so the other facts are actually not included. Maybe the other aspects. So, if I want to justify that this is my limitation, I only use this thing, can I still justify my research because I only used a couple of variables and came to a conclusion. Yeah, thank you, sir.
Yeah,
It was
yeah,
really good hearing you again.
yeah. No, no, thank you. Thank you for that. What is the pattern? Should we take more questions, or I'll answer them one by one? I'll just answer them one by one.
Better we
Yeah.
go on.
Okay. So I think the first question is, yeah, we are still debating. Yeah, what is happening with AI and how to use it in research, right? We are still debating. Among the research community itself, there are varied views on this, right? So I think there's an entire spectrum, right? So one, it depends on you know, if you're saying, okay, one side of the spectrum is human effort and the other side of the spectrum is AI effort, right? I would say that we should be, no, no, the other side, right? We should be in the direction of human effort, right? So human effort should be, the key of our research. Now there is a certain element of, okay, what do you mean by human effort, right? And the way I would say is that uh, what to me is acceptable, once again, and this is something that I've also discussed with some editors of journals, because I had the same problem, that question that you had. But I would say that the way you should go about research is that you should follow the structure, and you should humanly write up the first draft of the paper, right? You should humanly write up the first draft of the paper, and AI should be then a more sophisticated version of Grammarly, right? Just like you were using Grammarly in the last, before AI came, right? AI can help you a little bit more because it can help you with copy editing, right? It can help you with copy editing. And so, that would help you more in terms of how to reframe, right? So sometimes I do feel that AI is useful. In fact, I would go to extent of saying that AI can actually democratize research, right? Because sometimes, the language that we use in our classrooms, we speak in different terms, right? And the language that editors use is going to be different because they are located in different contexts, right? But AI can help you, fine tune your language in line with, what is the editorial requirements to some extent. But the crux of what you're doing, the first write up should always come from you, and that I feel very strongly about. In fact, I know journals which would go to the extent, because we know that AI is prone to hallucinations, right? For example, I'll give you an example of, one of my PhD students who was doing some project with me, and then he was writing something on history, right? And this, and so his citation came from, I think, a class 3 history textbook, right? And he was not analyzing class 3 history textbook, right? I wish he had done, he was doing so, but he was analyzing some, yeah. And then I could find out that it was all AI done, right? It was shocking, right? After that, yeah, it's very difficult for me to once again develop confidence in his, right? And I know journals that if they find this AI hallucination happening, they can actually ban, submissions from particular, right? So we have to be very, very careful about doing that, because research is a very small community. We have our reputations at stake, and we should need to protect our reputations. I think that is important. But in terms of paraphrasing and all that, yeah, I mean, that's fine. I think as more sophisticated Grammarly, that would be welcome, I would believe, right? The other thing about economic indicators is, yeah, if you are trying to analyze a certain phenomena, right? For example, you're looking at a phenomena of development, right? And you're confused about what should be the measures, right? One way to do that is to try and refer to what top scholars in the field have used, right? And pick up a top journal article which has used that particular term, and what is the kind of measures that have been used. I'm not saying that you should not bring in your new measure, but when you are trying to bring in a new measure, understanding what earlier people did, it's like, I'm not saying that don't bring in a new plane technology, aeroplane technology, bring it, but acknowledge and recognize the work of earlier researchers, right? There's a very beautiful phrase that we should stand high, but we will stand higher on the shoulders of the greats that have gone by, right? And we should always give respect for top scholars that have gone in and try to build on that work and not, just say, oh, everything else that was done was rubbish and what I'm saying is the gold standard. I don't think that's the way that research would move forward. Yeah, that's my opinion. Yeah. Any other questions? I can see a few other questions.
Yes, Malika, why don't you, speak up and address your queries to Professor Ajit? You have two questions, right?
Yes,
Malika,
sir. So,
yeah,
sir, I have two questions.
Yeah.
The first one was wanted a detailed difference between proposition and hypothesis. Second, the review that I've got on my paper, the reviewer is saying to dwell that I have just, assumed a theory, a theoretical framework rather than arguing that theory. So, how to go about that?
Yeah. So I think both are good questions, right? One is, let me start with the more mechanical one about the difference between proposition and hypothesis, right? So proposition is about the concept that you're trying to measure, right? So let me give an example, right? Which is a lame example, but will help in communicating what I want to say, right? So if I'm saying, okay, hard work leads to success, right? That would be a proposition. In my hypothesis, I'll try to find a way to measure hard work, right? In research terms, that will be called operationalization of that concept. And there'll be a lot of different, like for example, the previous question, somebody said, okay, development, right? Something leads to development, right? Tariffs lead to drop in development or increase in development, right? But then how do I measure development? That's hypothesis, right? So that is the mechanical difference between a proposition and a hypothesis. The second thing is, yes, I think that's a very good observation, right? So while you can introduce a theory, that this theory is interesting to bring light to certain forms of behavior, right? It's important to justify or argue for why this theory is relevant, right? So for example, there was some paper that I'm working on which talks about politician behavior, right? And I use a psychological framework to explain politician behavior. And so I need to say, okay, why does the psychological framework, help in explaining this particular politician behavior? I have to explain that. Yeah. And this is fine. I mean, this is something that, over time we cultivate by sometimes learning from other researchers, right? So always keeping some of the good journals in our reading list, right? Sometimes, it's good to keep an anchor paper, right? So, for example, I want to research on development. Who are the, which are the, anchor papers which are similar to mine, which have been published in good journals, and I can kind of, develop my own skills by learning from them, right? I can learn how they've written. I can learn the kind of arguments that they have made. So, so keep that in your reading list all the time. Yeah, because we become researchers based on the researchers we read, right? The scholars we read, and so keep that always in mind. Yeah. Any few more questions? I think we are almost out of time. Professor
yeah.
Venkat,
One
you can.
last question. Yeah, one
Yeah.
last question from Mr. Vivek. His question is, some papers are by necessity based on secondary research. Can you recommend tools, techniques to maximize effectiveness of secondary research?
Yeah. So primary research and secondary research have their advantages and disadvantages, right? Secondary research has an advantage because you have a large agency which has conducted secondary research, so their sample size is likely to be big and so on. I'm speaking primarily from survey research, right? So for example, if I want to study people's views on China, right? I don't know many data sources, but I know that the World Value Survey is one secondary research data that is available, which talks about public views in China. And of course, it does it across many countries across across the globe. I'm sure there may be other this thing. So the challenge, of course, is secondary research is the people who have developed the questionnaire have not kept your research in mind, right? So you will not get an ideal question, right? You will have to, in some way, satisfy with a question that is broadly asking whatever you right? So if I want to know uh, citizen citizen trust in democracy or something like that, right? Maybe the wordings in that questionnaire may be slightly different. It will say how confident you feel about institutions, right? So I'll have to kind of work around what is the data that is available, right? So I'll have to satisfy, but the advantage is that I'll get a large data set, right? The primary research, the advantage is that that I can create my questionnaire, but that requires a lot of resources to get a large enough sample, right? So that may be difficult to do, and so that is the kind of a trade-off that one makes between secondary and primary research. Of course, secondary research, if you use established databases like World Value Survey, it helps in positioning your research because you don't have to defend the data. It's already people know that some of these data sets are good. And so part of that, I would welcome you to send questions to me. And I hope to continue to engage with that. And of course, I would look forward to the conference very eagerly. Thank you very much, Professor Venkat and Professor Arvind, for inviting me. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Ajit. That was very nice of you to have spent your time to come here and share your views on research methodology. Now we move to the third speaker of today's workshop, uh, who is Professor Rajan Kumar, a very good friend of mine and a very well-known scholar. So before I pass on to Rajan to start his presentation, let me briefly introduce him. Most of you must be knowing him. So Professor Rajan Kumar teaches in School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, Delhi. His areas of interest include international politics, Russia and Central Asia, India's foreign policy, and research methods. His co-edited volume, Locating BRICS in the Global Order, Perspectives from the Global South, was published by Routledge, London in 2022. Earlier, he co-authored Re-Emerging Russia, Structures, Institutions and Processes, which was published by Palgrave Macmillan in 2017. He writes regularly for national and international journals. His columns appear regularly in Financial Express and other newspapers. He's a regular commentator on national and international media channels. So his topic is research methods in social sciences and area studies. So Professor Rajan, I would request you to, wrap up your presentation around 35 to 40 minutes, followed by Q&A, right? And then we can conclude the workshop. So over to you, Rajan.
Thank you, Venkat, and thank you, the other coordinator, Arvind, for having me here. Professor 𝐀𝐈𝐂𝐂𝐒, ma'am, if you're here, good morning to you and good morning to all the participants here. Also, I can see some of my students, Vaishnavi, Himadri, Maivin. Many of my students were requesting how to join this workshop, but probably it was closed for participants of ICS, so they couldn't join it. And I also didn't know that whether it was possible for them to join or not. But anyway, so let's have this discussion today. Happy Raksha Bandhan to all of you. It's a difficult day, as I can see. But anyway, you have come here, so thank you for coming. And thank you, Venkat, again. So let me start. Can you see my slide? Venkat, can you just confirm it? Can you see my slide here?
We can see.
You can see. Wonderful. Yeah, so thank you. Many of the things have been discussed, so I'll not be repetitive. So I'll skip some of the processes, but I'll try to give a slightly different flavor to the entire discussion. So these are the points that I would like to discuss. A few basic concepts of social science research. Very interesting questions are being asked. For instance, I just saw that Mallika was asking, what is a proposition and what is hypothesis? Somebody asking what is hypothesis and theory, etc. She was also asked. So very interesting questions are being asked. So I'll also try to clarify some of the doubts which have been raised already and very nicely answered by this Ajit Farnis ji. You did a wonderful job, Ajit ji. Usha ma'am also, thank you. You made my job really easy. So I'll just discuss the parts which have not been covered probably, and because of the lack of time, of course. So we have a very few basic concepts in social science research, and then I'll skip rather types of researches because that has been discussed already by Farnisa very well. Third, I'll talk about, because we are students of social science, so we cannot remain untouched to philosophical tradition from which we derive our methods. How do we design our research? Again, very briefly, I'll talk about it. And some of the biases, because some of the people have asked about biases and all. So I'll touch upon some of the things which lead to biases. But let me tell you the word, what is the meaning of the term research? Many times, students ask me in my class also, and the thing that research means research, that is when searched and you have to research. I think that's not the meaning of the research. Meaning of the word, research has originated from the French word recherche. Recherche means a way to understand the reality. So you're not researching, you're doing research to understand the reality. The reality is very complex, and your idea as a researcher is to comprehend the reality in a very simplified and comprehensible manner. The world is very complex, all of us know it. The reality is very complex, and our duty as a researcher or as an academic is not to make the research more complex. Our duty is to make it comprehensible to the audience that you are targeting. So that's the purpose of research, and this is based, because we are talking primarily about scientific research. You can also ask me later, depending on time. And Venkat, you have to manage your time, because you'll have to stop me. Give me 5 minutes in advance whenever the time is over. So it has to be based on observation and logical inferences. We'll talk about these two concepts again later. For the time being, let me, how do you imagine your research? And beautiful analogy was given by Ajit Farnis Saab, where he said that he is like climbing the mountain. My analogy is slightly different here, but I would like to start with analogy, which I find very interesting. Suppose, you're expecting some guests today on the Raksha Bandhan. Some of the guests might be coming to your house, or you might be going to somebody's house. So what do? You plan a dinner, lunch for them. So when you're planning a lunch or dinner for them, so what do? First thing that comes to your mind, that you have to imagine, what kind of meal am I going to serve? Is it going to be vegetarian? Is it going to be non-vegetarian? There'll be a starter, there'll be some welcome drink, there'll be some main course, then there'll be some dessert, and then finally a departure. So, the first thing that you should do whenever you're planning to do your research, there has to be broader imagination, even before you have started working on it. So that imagination is important. The way imagine your meal. So similarly, you imagine broadly what you call theory. I'll come to that, what is theory, etc. in a minute. So you imagine that what exactly you're planning to do. And theory is an integral part of the entire imagination process. So probably you start from there, and then what you do, that you have thought that, I'll be making some biryani, some veg biryani, veg pulao. So you'll have to look for ingredients like, a certain kind of rice, maybe paneer, mushroom, or whatever you want to put in the biryani. So you look for the ingredients. So similarly in research, what do? You look for the data. Once you have the theory in your mind, you start looking for the data. So these are the ingredients that, that you need for your research. The third step would be, you cannot cook biryani the way you cook khichdi. Right, just mixing up everything together will make you khichdi, but will not give you a biryani. Or if you want to cook some other items, so you'll have to apply certain rules for cooking. So similarly, when it comes to research, you'll have to apply those rules of cooking, those rules, the methods that we are talking about in today's presentation. So you'll have to apply rules of the method, the procedure for doing the research. It can be, say, for instance, case study, because many of you from area study. So it can be comparative case study. It can be larger theoretical study, which Ajit Farnis had talked about. And it can also be some very contextual study, which probably Usha ma'am was talking about. I missed a part of lectures, my apology there. And so you apply the rules of cooking. Similarly, you apply the rules for doing research. And rules are very different. Qualitative method would be very different. Quantitative method would be different. You can ask me later what method would be appropriate for your kind of research. I can give you some advice here. But again, as Farnis have rightly suggested, you can apply any of the methods, or depending on the research question, your training, etc., you can use multiple methods. It can be hybrid, mixed method also. That's also possible in your research. So apply the rules of cooking, apply the method that I'm saying for your research. And then what you do, remember one thing, that your meal would be vetted by the others, the guests who are coming for your to have that meal, they will decide whether they liked your food or not. You cannot claim that you have done the best possible research, or you have made the best possible biryani, and it cannot be better than that. That has to be decided by your the guests who have come. So always remember, your audience is important. Are you writing for the Indian crowd? Are you writing for an international audience? Are you writing for a very localized kind of audience? So that also you need to keep in mind, and your quality of research would be decided by the community who read your research. The scientific community, academic community, some kind, it can be just ordinary people. So they will decide the quality of your research, and it will not be decided just by you. So keep that in mind. These are the 4 things that you need to broadly how you imagine your research. There's an analogy, a different kind of analogy here. Some of the concepts are very important. Very briefly, I'll just get into the concepts, because many here I can see there are students, and they get confused here about how to understand those concepts. The first and important concept is constant and variable. Whenever you're trying to explain something, please remember that you have to explain with the help of variable and not the constant. The example that I often use in my class, I'm repeating it here. For instance, if I fall down from my building, I live on the 6th floor here in JNU campus. So if I fall down from my building and if I break my leg, what would be the possible causes of my breaking of the leg? The possible causes could be, that somebody pushed me, I was drunk, or I wanted to commit suicide. So these are the variables that would be used to explain why I broke my leg and why I fell down. But nobody will blame the gravity. I fell down because of gravity, but nobody will say that he broke his leg because of Earth's gravity force. Why? Because gravity is constant. So whenever you're thinking in terms of explanation, whenever you are trying to explain something, always think in terms of variable and not the constant. All right. So that you need to remember. Many times in social sciences, I've seen, for instance, when they're explaining the insurgents in Kashmir or in Chhattisgarh or in Nepal, they say that mountainous and difficult terrain of that region is responsible for the insurgency. I would like to ask them, this same kind of terrain was there in 1950s, 40s, and even earlier. Why was no insurgency in that period? What I'm trying to say here, you have to use the variable and not the constant. Territory is constant. If you want to convert territory into variable, you can say territoriality rather than territory. So never use constant to explain something. But in geography, in many times I've seen, the constants are used as variables, and that's problematic that you need to keep in mind. Hypothesis, very quickly, just 30 seconds, I'll explain you. Hypothesis is nothing but the testable statement. And why do you frame hypothesis? You frame hypothesis because you have a research question in your mind, and you want to answer your research question. So it's a tentative research question answer to the research question that you have framed for your research. And it can be a simple connection between, say, independent variable and the dependent variable, which is cause and effect. It can be a simple testable statement. The sky is blue, so it's a kind of univariate kind of thing that you're testing here. So that is also possible. But when it can be causal means when you're trying to relate cause and effect, when your study is much more theoretical and it's not just descriptive. So you can have causal hypothesis. So then you'll have to think in terms of independent variable as the cause and the dependent variable as the effect. For instance, if you study hard, you'll get good grades. So independent variable connected with the dependent variable. All right. And very beautiful hypothesis was being given by Ajit Farnisab, where he was giving you the hypothesis of liberalism in international politics, where democracies don't fight. The dependent variable was absence of fight, absence of war, and the independent variable was the democracy or democratic countries don't fight. So democracy contributing to absence of war. So those were the variables connected to formulate his hypothesis. So a beautiful hypothesis given there. So you already know what is it. So hypothesis can be of 3 types. One is a simple testable statement: the sky is blue, and you can go and check whether the sky is blue or not. Democracies will not fight, so that you can test with the data. You can go and collect the data. Sometimes hypothesis can be comparative, and that is also a valid hypothesis and very useful for explanation. For instance, if you say China's economy is growing slower than India's economy, so that is a comparative. You do not have necessarily independent variable here, but you're comparing 2 variables, Chinese growth and India's growth. So it can be comparative hypothesis. So what I said, simple testable statement, univariate kind of hypothesis, causal hypothesis and comparative hypothesis. And in many of the times, you will combine all three together. It's not necessarily just one hypothesis, not just one framework, but you might have a hybrid kind of hypothesis. So hypothesis is, for instance, if I just give you one example of hypothesis, Durkheim, you might have heard Durkheim, a sociologist, as you know. So he gave a hypothesis that the people who are in urban areas, they are more likely to commit suicide than the people who are in the rural areas. The people who are in army, they are more likely to commit suicide than people who are not in army or who are civilians. Or men are more likely to commit suicide than female. So that is the kind of comparative hypothesis even Durkheim framed. Similarly, Huntington, class of civilization, etc. So you'll have to go and check, and you can ask me later. But remember, hypothesis is important. Now, the question that you should ask me later maybe, that is it necessary to have hypothesis in every research? My answer is no. For every research, because many of the students I could see Nisit here. Nisit was in my hostel as a student. So Nisit or Nishant? Nisit was here. So Nishit, for instance, if you're from language background, you may not be framing hypothesis when you're writing a research paper. Most of the research papers are case-based study, very contextual, very historical. So it's not necessary for every research to formulate hypothesis. You can do with the research question and or research puzzle. Also, you can frame a statement of problem. You can frame, and you can straight go to answer the research questions. But if you are planning to have theoretical study, if you're either proposing a theory or you are testing a theory, so then it's useful to have hypothesis in your research. So that's the answer of your question, in case you had that question in your mind. Second is validity and reliability. So validity is about measurement. People will ask you that how do you minimize the biases? The very quick short answer would be your research has to be valid, your research has to be reliable. What does validity mean? Validity is about accurate measurement. And reliability is about if I have done the research following a scientific procedure, and if Venkat has done the research following the same scientific procedure, Venkat, me, two of us should come to the same conclusion. So that's reliability. But validity is about measurement. The kind of concept that you employ to measure certain, the variables that you employ to measure the concept, whether that is valid or not. For instance, you measure water in terms of liter, not kilometer. So similarly, when you're measuring the concept in social science, the measurement has to be accurate. And the problem in social science is that how do you measure concept like democracy? That yes, people say that India's democracy is declining, or people say that secularism is in crisis. Now, how do you measure the concept of? It's not like measuring water or temperature of natural sciences. So measuring the concept is an important challenge that you'll have to understand, and that is where people say that your this research is not valid. Why? Because the way you measure the concept, sometimes that measurement is not accurate. For instance, if you want to measure the democracy of India, you cannot say that India is growing by 6.5%. It's been growing for the last 3 years, so India is a great democracy. No. That's a wrong, inaccurate, invalid kind of research. If you want to measure the democracy, you have to measure in terms of separation of power, the functioning of civil society, the way political parties are working, whether there is control on media or not. So these are the ways through which you measure the concept of democracy. But that measurement becomes a challenge in social science because you are measuring concepts which are defined variously by various people, and it does not have the same meaning to different set of people. For instance, revolution means something here in India, it means something else in China, it means something else in the United States. So measuring the concept becomes a challenge in social science, but that remains a challenge, and we can discuss that later if we have time. I think one important concept that I would like to discuss is correlation and causation. Many a times because two set of data would be correlated. So we say that, correlation, we confuse between what you call it correlation and causation. But remember, you'll have to distinguish between correlation and causation. Not every correlation is causation. Say, for instance, you have the data on police personnel deployed in a certain region, a very high number of police personnel deployed in that region, and you also have a very high rate of crime. So you found the data, you done the correlation, and correlation gave you a very high positive correlation of say 0.8 or 0.9 or even 1, saying that more police personnel and more crime. So you'll come to a wrong conclusion saying that police personnel are responsible for the crime. But here you need to distinguish that just because two set of data is correlated does not mean one is causing the other. Causation, which means cause and effect, that's a theoretical concept. And that's why I said you start with the theory. Causation is a theoretical concept, and it does not, you cannot derive causation from the data. It comes from your intuition, it comes from your experience, it comes from your broader understanding. It cannot come from the data. And that's why your theory is independent of data, it's an abstraction of reality, but it's not the theories never emerge from the data. You have the theory and you test the theory with the help of data. We can come to that later, but for the time being, just remember correlation is not causation, and you should not confuse correlation with causation. I think one thing that you need to ask whenever you're doing your research, when you're writing your paper, you have written your paper, so you'll have to distinguish, ask between what is called as necessary condition and sufficient condition, right? You might use a lot of variables, but again, you might not be providing the sufficient condition for your explanation. Especially important when you're trying to explain something, whether you're following historical method, quantitative method, qualitative method. This you need to ask. For instance, let me give an example. If Venkat wants to become the president of India, what are the requirements? Necessary condition for Venkat, vice president's post is vacant, so he can apply for that. His necessary condition would be that and that he has to 35 years of age, Indian citizen, not lunatic. He has to not have any beneficiary job, etc. Venkat will leave the job in case he's offered that post. But what Venkat fulfills at the moment is just the necessary condition, not the sufficient condition. Why? Sufficient condition would come when he has the blessings of the Prime Minister Modi and support from the Parliament. So what you need to ask when you're doing a research, that whether I have provided just the necessary condition for research, or have you provided a sufficient condition where all the variables, important things have been included. So in a model, whenever you're trying to give these are the causes, you need to ask yourself whether you have provided necessary condition or sufficient condition. I think one important concept is equifinality or a multiplicity of causes. Many times, because positivist scholars, and many times we follow scientific method, and I'll also be discussing scientific method today primarily. So we tend to believe that if there is one event that can only be caused by one set of factors, like H2O can only cause water, or water can only be caused by H2O. So that influence has come in social science also, and we tend to believe that only one set of causes would be responsible for one set of. The problem is that the way we understand the concepts in social science, they vary. As I said, that revolution is understood differently by different set of people. Bolshevik revolution has been caused by a different set of causes. Industrial revolution by different set of causes, French revolution, different set of causes, American revolution, different. So, when you are trying to explain a concept or an idea in social science, please remember the same set of cause will not accept even if the term is same, because terms are used differently by different set of people and different communities. So you need to be careful. Another thing, object and subject distinction, objectivity, subjectivity, etc. Scientific research tells you that you have to be a neutral observer. What you are doing is subject, so your subjectivity should not influence the object that you study. So that objectivity, it is a requirement, and you are expected to be objective. But yes, that's a challenge, and how do you? We can talk about it later, depending on time. But many of the researchers who do not follow necessarily, or who are critical of scientific method, they argue that object and subject distinction cannot be established. And I'll come to that when I'm talking about philosophy. So just wait for time. Depending on time, I'll also talk about some of the biases in research, like selection bias, omitted variable bias. If you're doing a quantitative study, multicollinearity, ethnocentrism, ideological problem of endogeneity. So these are the things that you can ask me later if you want a study which is unbiased and which is a scientific study. So I'll come to that later. Type of researches has already been discussed beautifully by Ajit Farni Saab, so I'm not touching a descriptive, explanatory, interpretative. For the students here who are from language background, culture background, for them narrative-based, discourse-based, or interpretative study, they are very important. But they are also, and for the rest of them who are from social sciences, for them scientific study, case study, comparative case study, those are the useful methods which they can apply. I think very briefly, just 2 minutes, I'll talk about the debate between debate between positivism and constructivism. So that's about philosophy. I think for the first rate research, you also need to train yourself in a bit of philosophy. So what you need to ask yourself when you start your research, properly original research. So then you have to think in terms of ontology, epistemology, and methodology. Ontology is the nature of existence. Epistemology is the study of knowledge, and their methodology, what we are talking in today's discussion. So we'll talk about that just in a second. What is ontology? Ontology is what constitutes reality, and how can we understand its existence? So those are the questions which are ontological questions. When you're talking about epistemology, epistemology is what constitutes the basic knowledge, and how do we obtain it? So ontology is about what constitutes reality, and epistemology is about what constitutes a basic knowledge, and how do we obtain that knowledge that we are interested in. Methodology is strategy and techniques to get to that reality. The whole purpose of research is to get to the reality. What do you call reality? How do you perceive that reality? How do you understand that reality? That's the purpose of your research. So here is the, there are debates, philosophical debates when you're talking about the ontology. So there are 3 groups of scholars which are important here to understand. Objectivist, positivist. Objectivist, they say that reality is out there, and you just need to observe it through your sensory organs or with the help of certain technological aids. So objectivist, they are certain that you can get the reality if you follow a scientific procedure. Subjectivists, on the other hand, argue that there is no reality, and whatever you say is interpretation. So this post-positivism, subjectivism, where I locate myself, if you ask me, somebody was talking about reflexivity, where do I locate myself? What are my opinion and views? So I locate myself in the realm of what you call critical realism. So where I believe that reality is there, but we understand it only through interpretation, given the finite and limited capability to know about the part of the entire problem. You can never get to the entire picture of what you call reality. Even the smallest of research that you'd be doing, you can never collect the data. Your data is never going to be accurate. There'll be a lot of problems there. Again, when you analyze something through survey method, whatever method, it will never be complete, and it can never be absolutely accurate. So what a critical realist argue, that reality is there, but we understand only through interpretation, given the finite and limited capability to know only the part of the entire problem. This is also Immanuel Kant's position. Application. So what is the application? Because we are more interested as a scholar here. What is the application of this ontological thing that we are talking about, the philosophy which some of you may be familiar with? So what you need to do if you're defining democracy, if you're defining war, if you're defining Chinese socialism, so you need to define the concept, you need to conceptualize it, and you need to classify into categories. So ontological issue will push you to go into definition, classification, conceptualization. So that's why it's important. Second is epistemology. How do you go to what you call the knowledge? One is literature review. You have done it, but there are other ways of, to mode of getting to what you call reality. One is intuitive. Many people, get through intuition, and that's a very perfect way of getting to what you call, many people, scientists, as you know, Einstein has accepted it, Archimedes has accepted it, a lot of people, scientists have accepted. There are certain eureka moment when they're working on something else, but suddenly they discover something which became very relevant. They're not working on this project, but there are certain moments when you get those ideas, and there is no scientific way to explain why scientists got that idea. This question was asked to Einstein, and he said there's no perfect answer. There's no logical answer to that question. So you have that eureka moment. Second is authoritative knowledge. When I talk of authoritative knowledge, this refers to review of literature, which was discussed by Ajit Farnisa. So that is authoritative knowledge. Read the literature and try to figure out how you can get something different or something new. Third is analogy, metaphor. In the beginning, what did I do? I used an analogy to explain you what is research. Analogy of how do you cook biryani, etc. So that is an analogy. For instance, when you try to understand the surface of Mars, you may not go to Mars, but you'll say that surface of Mars is like the surface of Moon or like Himalaya. So you have an analogy here, and you try to understand something through analogy, even when you do not have direct access to that place. Of course, logical inference, inductive, deductive, all of you know, so I should not be getting into it. Empirical observation through sensory organs, that again, because when you do your primary collection of data, when you do your data collection yourself, so that again is an important way of collecting the information, etc. So epistemological part in your research would be your experience, your review of literature, your observation and inferences. So that is extremely important and then comes the method. Research design, again, is a scientific method. It follows the fixed paradigm, fixed pattern, which is this one, what you can see it here. You start with a research question, go to the review of literature, you have a theory. You can ask me later whether theory comes first or research question comes first. I can answer you later. But yeah, review of literature. Somebody asked a very beautiful question. I think Malika asked a question that what is the difference? What is assume theory and arguing a theory? So here it comes to your theory, and you can ask me again later if you have any question related to theory. So what is theory? Theory, again, you have to think in terms of, there are a few basic purposes of theory. First, theory is nothing but explanation. Whenever you're trying to give a theory, you are trying to explain something. You have a research question in mind, and you are trying to provide an explanation to that. So explanation is an important component of theory. Second, by nature, because you are explaining through universal causation, so it will have predictive elements. So you are also trying to predict through your theory. The example which was given here, democracies don't fight. So which means the evidence has come from the past, but democracies will not fight in the future also. That's the theory. Similarly, when Newton is saying every action will have equal and opposite reaction, so it applies not just to England, but it applies to all the society, and it will apply also in the future. Every theory will have what do you call predictive element. So explanation is an important component of a theory. Prediction is important. Theory, the best of the theories are universal in nature. Karl Popper has worked on this aspect, deductive theorization, etc. And what he argues that your theory should be riskier, and best of the theories are universal because the chances of falsifiability would be higher. What is falsifiability? Falsifiability is an important concept that you need to remember whenever you are trying to propose a theory. When you're proposing a theory in a way, the statement which is not falsifiable, then it will not be a scientific statement. So when you're proposing a theory, you have to frame the statement in a way which is falsifiable. This is not my argument. This is the argument of Karl Popper. If you read The Logic of Scientific Discovery, so he says that why your scientific statement has to be falsifiable. Now, let me give you an example of how you can make your statement or theory falsifiable, and how some of the people frame theories in a way which are non-falsifiable. And this falsifiability is considered an important part of proposing a theory, and all the scientific theories are falsified. It does not mean your theory is false. What it means is that you have to frame a theory in a way which is falsifiable. For instance, I might say that it is going to rain, one statement, and I can say a second statement, it is going to rain tomorrow in Delhi. The two statements, right? It is going to rain, and it is going to rain tomorrow in Delhi. So two statements. One statement here, it is going to rain, that is non-falsifiable. Why? Because somebody came to me and said, sir, you said it is going to rain, and it didn't rain. So I'll defend myself by saying that I said it is going to rain. I didn't say that it's going to rain when and where, right? So that kind of statement is non-falsifiable statement. On the other hand, if I say it is going to rain tomorrow in Delhi, so that becomes a falsifiable statement. So you always have to frame theory when you're proposing a theory. You have to propose theory in a way which is falsifiable. Like democracies do not fight. The moment somebody comes with an example that, sir, India and Pakistan were democracies in 1990s when Sharif was there, and India fought with Pakistan. So that theory doesn't stand true, and it has to. So that theory is true, although it's falsifiable, but that theory is falsifiable, which means it's a scientific theory. So frame theory in a way which is falsifiable. That's a requirement. So what I'm trying to say here, theory, the basic purpose of theory is to answer the research question in a causal way, where you explain something. It has to be predictive. It has to be falsifiable. One more thing that you need to remember, and I'm arguing from Karl Popper here, that theories are independent of data. Theories are not derived from the data. You can ask me later about the deductive and inductive logic, but for the time being, just remember that according to Karl Popper, theories are abstraction of reality and not derived from the reality. You can give a theory, for instance, Karl Popper tells you that all the swans are white. All right, you have given the theory. Now you go and look for the swans, whether the swans are white or not. The moment you find a swan which is black, you reject your theory. You gave a theory, all the democracies are peaceful and they do not fight. Now you have given the theory, then go and look for the data. And the moment you find a case or two cases where two democracies are fighting, you will have to reject your theory. All right. Anyway, so that's philosophical debate. Let me just tell you that this is the way you frame your theory, you formulate your theory, and your hypothesis. Whenever you frame your hypothesis is always derived from your theory. Remember that, and that's why I put it after theory, because your theory is the broad concept that you connect, and when you're formulating hypothesis, you connect and think in terms of measurable, testable variables. That's why independent and dependent variables become important here, because with democracies don't fight, you can have several hypotheses. That theory has at least 20-25 hypotheses which have been tested. So your hypothesis is always derived from the theory that you propose or theory that you're testing. So hypothesis would be necessary for the research if your research is theoretical in nature. If your research is case study, contextual, very historical, qualitative, and discursive, then you may skip the hypothesis part. It's not necessary. But again, also remember, theory is also understood differently by different people. Positivist will understood theory in a scientific way, the way I'm explaining it today. But if you talk to a post-colonialist scholar, Partha Chatterjee or Gayatri Spivak or Edward Said, so they give a different definition of theory. For them, theory doesn't mean a grand narrative, grand theory, the way the positivist will give you theory. The way Marx gives the theory, the way Durkheim, the way Huntington, the way Doyle of democracy, the way Kenneth Walsh of international politics. So they have different meaning of theory. They are following largely the scientific paradigm, but post-colonial, post-modern scholars, they mean differently when they use the word theory. So you have to be clear the way you use the term theory. What I'm using it here is a very scientific way of using theory, but you can ask me later what is the post-structuralist method of meaning of theory, etc. So you have the hypothesis, you have the variables, and that hypothesis will guide you what kind of data you want to collect. You say that the virus of from Wuhan led to the spread of COVID in China and other parts of the world. So you'll have to go and collect the data from Wuhan on the COVID. So hypothesis is guiding you to go and for the collection of the data. All right. And you can have, for one theory, you can have several hypotheses, not one or two. You can have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, several hypotheses, as many as you wish, depending on the variables which are required to be measured and tested. After that, data collecting, with the data, you will test the hypothesis. And once hypothesis is testing, you will do the reporting. So that's about very briefly about the research process that I said you. Now the question that you might be interested, because you are writing a research paper here. So what are the major components? Forget everything what I said. All right. Just now you are in the stage of writing a paper or a research proposal. What do you do? If you don't remember anything what you have learned in your research methodology class, just remember 4 things. Frame critical question. That's number 1. If you are using theory, or if you're not using theory, just give the explanation. So propose a theory or just give the explanation. Question, theory, data, and data analysis. These are 4 cardinal things for any research done anywhere in the world. That's what they do. Question, theory, data, and data analysis. And there are different ways of doing it, but 4 things you need to remember. If you're writing a research paper, if you're writing a research proposal, these 4 things are integral to any research. So that you need. Now, the question that you ask me, how do you improvise the research question? That's very interesting way of putting it, because you want a novelty, you want to do something different, you want to do something new. All of you are writing paper for this program. So what you need to do, you have to improve the research question. That would be a novelty of the research. You can improve the theory, you can improve the data quality, you can improve the data usage of the research. And now, how do you improve the research questions? I'm coming to that. This is the way you can improve the research question. As Mr. Fadnis was saying that, if you are doing some novel research, so you'll have to improve the research question. Now, the question is, how do you improve the research question? So ask a question, because we are from social sciences, ask a question which is socially relevant. And all of us do that. So there's nothing new here. So ask a novel question for which no systematic study has been conducted. So if you do that, so that would be a novel question that you can ask. Ask a question which challenges the established notion. If you think that, people are saying that this COVID was caused by a bacteria, and you want to say that, no, it was not bacteria, it was virus, or if it was something else, so just say that. Just ask the question which is challenges the established notion. Or if you think that Indian politics is determined by caste, so ask a question that that's not true. There are several societies in India which are not determined by the caste, but voting is not determined by. So ask a question which challenges the established notion. So that again is an important contribution of the literature. Ask a question if you suspect that the available answers are not true. You have done the review of literature and you think that they have not answered in a way that will satisfy you. So then you can ask a question for which the answers available you think are false. A question can be useful if it provides more evidence to one side of the controversy. For instance, you have constructivism, realism, Marxism, socialism, and nationalism, etc. So the different schools. Even if you take just to one side, and if you provide more data or better explanation, even from one side, so that would be considered an important contribution to the literature. So don't be afraid of taking the controversial side. Only thing that you need to remember that you have to improvise your any one side with more data and better explanation. That's what you need to keep in mind. Extrapolation of method or approach from one discipline to other can be extremely useful. Somebody was asking the question to the previous speaker that how can this research be interdisciplinary? Remember one thing, at least in international politics, I can tell you that they have applied all the possible approaches from different disciplines. International studies by design, by nature, is very interdisciplinary. I'll tell you, for instance, Morgenthau, when he came, he was using historical method, he was using law, etc., legal method. When Kenneth Waltz came, he was using the positivist method, where he was influenced by positivist called broader scientific method, and he was also influenced by economics. So he started saying about anarchy, international order, and then he defines the balance of power. That balance of power theory has been influenced by what? That balance of power theory has been influenced by what he called the market equilibrium, the way pricing mechanism creates an equilibrium in the market. So bipolarity, multipolarity, all that equilibrium that you're talking about has been derived from economics and econometrics method, and that's what he uses. When this guy came, Alexander Wendt, when he was talking about the social theory of international politics, so he brought philosophy, he brought historical approach to what you call constructivist method. So then he brought different. So what I'm trying to say, international politics, you have various disciplines influencing international politics, and you can use any method that if you're coming from language background, you can use discursive method, you can use narrative interpretative method in international politics. If you're coming from economics background, so you can use econometrics and quantitative method for international politics. So these are the ways you can frame or improve your research question. Now, the second thing is that how do you improve your theory? Suppose you are proposing a theory. Remember, in India, we are at the cusp, and we should be proposing the theory and not necessarily borrowing the theories from outside. International politics is essentially, even today, a kind of Anglo-Saxon world theories. Most of the theories that you see, they have originated from either United States or England, and maybe few from Europe and Australia. That's it, end of the story. If I ask you, give me a theory in international politics from Japan, none. Give me a theory from India, you will think very hard and maybe come with some name, Amartya Sen, who is hardly international politics theoretician. So why? You need to ask yourself, and you should not be afraid of proposing a theory. All right, and I told you how to propose a theory, etc. So how the question is how to improvise the theory. Purpose is to explain and predict, as I told you. Scientific theories are always falsifiable. I've already said that, so I'll not be explaining it here. Instead of limiting the scope of theory, try to keep it as open as possible. What do I mean? That you do not try to limit your theory by saying that my theory is applicable only to the case of India or to South Asia. If you're saying that, you are trying to save your theory from falsifiability. If it becomes universal, then the chances of falsifiability would be higher. The best of the theories are very riskier theory because they have higher chance of falsifiability. So best of the theories are that's way universal in nature because the data can come from any place and it can falsify the theory. But if you are narrow in scope, limited in scope, then you are trying to save the theory and they are not the best. But although because we are from area study program, Robert Merton, sociologist, Robert Merton tells you that you can also have middle dense theories. the theories which have emerged from the region, a certain region, say from Eurasia or from East Asia or from South Asia. So that kind of theory is possible, because in that case, that region becomes the universe, rather than, say, for instance, if you're talking about the caste system in India, so your universe is essentially South Asia, because that's the, so when you have that kind of issue, so then your universe changes, and you can have that kind of theory, limited middle length theory, that is also possible. So when you're proposing a theory, it has to be internally logically consistent, and you should be comparing your theory with the other theories. Your theory would be better if it explains more in terms of data. If it explains more data, so your theory is likely to be better. And logical consistency, that's a kind of necessary requirement, and all of you understand it has to be inductive, deductive. I'm not getting in there because that's a necessary requirement. Carpenter is never praised for his tool. Carpenter is praised for his, the aesthetics that you create in the product. So logical consistency, accuracy of data, validity, reliability, they are the essential tools that you have to have for any scientific research. All right, when you frame the hypothesis, identify variable, speculate between variables, etc. 3 types I've already discussed, so I'm not getting into there. Hypothesis can be of several types: null hypothesis, alternative hypothesis. Again, you'll have to read a bit. Data is primary, secondary. Again, there is a debate between what is primary and secondary data. In many places, the data that you collect yourself, that is considered primary data. But in many institutions, for instance, JNU, the place where I teach, here institutional data is also considered primary data. And not only here, I've checked Oxford, Cambridge also. In many places, the data, institutional data is also considered primary data. Institution, by institution, I mean the government data, IMF, World Bank, etc. So that is considered primary data. In history also, because you cannot go back to history to collect the data of Indus Valley civilization. So literary text of that period would be considered primary data, or archaeological, archaeological excavation, etc. that you do. So that is also considered primary data. So the primary data varies from one place to other. Economists will tell you, most of the economists, that only the data that you collect yourself, when you do survey, ask some data, so that is primary data. But in history, but also in international politics, institutional data would be considered primary data and not the second. So it varies from place to place, but by and large, if somebody asks you what is primary data, so the data that you collect is the primary data. But again, it varies from the discipline to discipline, as I said. When you collect the primary data, do not necessarily think that primary data is always unbiased and it gives you to a better research. No. For instance, I work on Russia. My specialization is Russia and Eurasia and international politics. But if I take the data from Russian website, government website, that data is likely to be biased, right? The government is saying only 15,000 people have been killed in Russia-Ukraine war. The reality is more than 2 lakh people, 2 lakh soldiers have been killed even from the Russian side. So you cannot consider uncritically what the government is providing. Same in the case of China, because China is also a very controlled system. So you cannot completely rely on the Chinese set of data as something which is primary, but primary data can also be biased. So you have to critically engage with the primary data. Secondary data again can be sometimes scientific, sometimes biased, or depending on the source and writing, etc. Now whether qualitative or quantitative. Many times people ask me whether that he or she should do qualitative or quantitative research. My simple answer is that that will depend upon your research question. That will depend upon your training, and that will also depend upon the requirement, right? Many times, and do not think that qualitative is inferior to quantitative. No, that's not the case. The logic of inference in qualitative and quantitative in scientific method is the same. It's not different. And if you want to read a book, so Designing Social Inquiry by 𝐀𝐈𝐂𝐂𝐒, I'll probably show you the book later. So Designing Social Inquiry, that's the book, and it argues how qualitative method, scientific qualitative method, is very similar to what you call a scientific quantitative method. But yes, coming to here, how do you collect the data? It can be from the experiment, most of the labs, etc. In social science also we do experiment. Psychology does a lot of experiment. So it can be through experiment, it can be through indirect observation, archival, institutional dataset, direct observation, survey, fieldwork, interview, etc. So those are the ways to collect the data. Data quality, people, if you want to be unbiased, as somebody asked in the beginning, so you have to check the validity, you have to check the reliability. Validity is about measurement, I already said, and that's the reason I discussed some of the concept in the beginning, so that all of us are on the same page when I'm talking about some. So validity, accurate measurement, reliability, you, somebody else, third person doing a scientific research, all of you should come to the same conclusion. If you're using same data, same method, or even if you're using scientific method, using slightly different data. Analysis of data can be qualitative or quantitative. Absolutely feel free to use any method. Case study, by and large, would be, by and large, I'm saying, would be qualitative. Historical method are essentially qualitative. In political science, you'll feel qualitative, quantitative mixed. Sociology, both. Economics, more quantitative, less qualitative. But yes, depending on your training, your research method, your research question, if you want to study just one case, so you can have a case study qualitative kind of research, that's possible. But one thing that Venkat asked me also to speak a bit because we are from area studies, so what kind of method would be appropriate? And I'm also from area study, let me tell you, because my center is called Center for Russian and Central Asian Studies. So in area study, I think the most appropriate method would be either case study or comparative case study. So that would be the most appropriate. Why? Because many times your focus is, say, East Asia or Eurasia or Central Asia or some organization which is active in the region, say for instance BRICS, or say for instance Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So in those cases, I think comparative case study would be very useful. Case study again is very useful if you are trying to understand the certain ethnic community in China. So the case study is very likely to the most appropriate method. But also remember, because we are doing it, looking at from the international politics perspective. So if you know theories, if you have an understanding of the larger pattern, or if you know, say for instance, theories of ethnicity, and then you study a certain ethnic community in China or in East Asia, so you can apply the theories of ethnicity to understand the case of that whatever ethnic community that you want to study. And there are concepts of intersubjectivity, etc., that we can discuss later, depending on time. Qualitative methods would engage with the most of the researchers are descriptive analytical. So there is nothing. It's a no-brainer. All of you already do that. So Venkat, am I running short of time now?
Yeah,
Yes.
5 minutes. 5 minutes.
Thank you. Yeah. So I'm going to finish it. Analytical is irrespective of what method you decide to choose, case study, qualitative, quantitative, and this what you call theoretical method. So all the methods invariably would be would be analytical, and even if you're descriptive, many times you have to be a bit of analytical also. A narrative style of description, that is very popular in what you call literary fictions and biographies. When you write in first person, second person, etc. In social sciences, we avoid that kind of narrative, and we rather focus on other methods which are popular. Historical and process tracing, that method is again very popular in the case study and also in the historical method. So you try to trace the process rather than just one particular event. For instance, Ajit Fadni Saab said, democracies do not fight. What is that? That's a theory. That's not a historical process, that's a theoretical process, where he's saying that democracies are unlikely to engage in conflict with each other. So that's a theoretical method of doing the research, as a deductive method of doing the research. But when you do a case study, when you do a contextual study, I want to do Indus Valley civilization. I want to do the relationship that existed between India and Tibet in the historical period. So it can be a very different kind of historical study, and where theories are not very helpful. In many cases, the grand theories that you propose, that would not be helpful because you are from case study or area study background. So please remember, for area study, this is important, and comparative case study is also important. For comparative case study, I'll recommend, please read this John Stuart Mill, what is called most similar design and most different design. That's that concept you can just type on the Google, and you can ask me later if you have question. Whether you can use qualitative analysis of data, quantitative analysis of data. As I said, the logic of inference is same in qualitative and quantitative scientific when you do scientific research. They're not different, and qualitative will not come to different conclusion if you're following a scientific procedure. I'm not getting into statistics here, but somebody was asking artificial intelligence, use of artificial intelligence in what do you call it, IR, international politics. So we have written research manual for SIS. I was part of it. So we have accepted that we allow the students to use artificial intelligence. Only thing that they have to be careful that they should not be copying. But if they want some information, they can ask the question. And sometimes they're also allowed to use references. You can give that, this information is from this ChatGPT, but if you give the information from ChatGPT, it has to be verified from other sources. You cannot simply, because ChatGPT is not unbiased, or DeepSeek that you study for China, that you use for China. So that is not unbiased. ChatGPT, if you ask ChatGPT about democracy, so it will have certain kind of biases. About Trump, President Modi, Xi Jinping, it has certain Western biases. Why? Because the data on which they have been trained, ChatGPT has been trained, the data is primarily the Western data. So you have to be careful, because most of us from the non-Western societies, and we try to write from a different perspective. So we should not be, completely relying on ChatGPT. You have to be critically engaged with the other literature, scholars, and surveys to counter the ChatGPT. But please feel free to use the ChatGPT, and that's pretty acceptable, but not unverified and not uncritically taking the data or analysis from there. So I think, Venkat, let me stop it here, and I'll be happy to answer a few questions in case they're there. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Rajan. That was very comprehensive. And since you gave me the liberty to step in, I did. Otherwise, I would not have dared to. It was a very engaging presentation. Not only by you, but the two speakers who preceded you. It's like each speaker was, making a platform for the other to build on. And I hope all the participants today agree that put together, all the three made a holistic kind of a picture at the end. So thanks a lot. Devahuti Sarkar is raising her hand. I would encourage other participants to raise your hands and address your queries to Professor Rajan. And we have around 10 to 15 minutes, and then we will be winding up so that all of us can go and join the festivities of Raksha Bandhan. Yes, Devahuti, please.
Hello, Professor. Thank you for that great lecture, so extensive. As you rightly pointed out, that we need to engage with data very cautiously, whether it's coming from the West or it's coming from the Chinese government itself. So, like in the Indian context, when we look at, when we analyze policy and we try to substantiate our arguments with data, we look at a lot of third party sources, right? Third party data sources, which can emerge from academics, civil society, think tanks. So, I mean, this might lead the conversation towards the information ecosystem in China. But I mean, what is the concrete way to engage with data cautiously and when it comes to China? And are there such third party data sources anything that you could refer to? So my research is in agriculture, but I think, anything related to economics, development, policy would be useful. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Anybody else? Is there any other question? I can take one or two questions, and then. Okay. So before the others think of, let me answer the question of Devahuti, right? Devahuti Sarkar. Devahuti, that's a challenge. When you're working in a system which is a Chinese system, and as you said that you work in agriculture, how do you get the data? That's a major challenge. And that's exactly the problem that I also face when I try to get some primary essential information on Russia. In the authoritarian system, they have one set of data which is questionable, and the Western narrative are equally questionable. So how do you get the data that you want to, the data which would be much more authentic? So that's a real challenge. So the third source of data can be if you start engaging with some of the scholars there. The perspective that I get on Russia, it comes not from the formal presentation that when I go to seminars and conferences in Russia. So that's a very formal way. When I engage with the scholars, engage with some of the people there, So they give you a very accurate picture. For instance, the government says only 20,000 soldiers have been killed. Now, that's not true in the case of Russia, and everybody knows it. But how do you get the real picture? You get the real picture when you engage with some of the scholars. For that, you need to develop trust, interpersonal trust, that whatever people that you're talking in China, they have to trust you that you will not misuse the information, you will not misquote that person. So if in this kind of society, if you engage with the scholars, not in a very formal way, but also through informal way, then you can get some accurate data. But otherwise, yes, what you need to do, you trust but verify. Even if the data is coming from the government, you take the data that this is the primary data coming from the government, but try to have a third set of data, what you're saying, third set of data from some international agencies or some other organization. But the best in this society, the best data comes if you informally engage with the people, with the civil society, with the some of your friends and colleagues. So that's where you get some idea of what exactly is. But otherwise, it's very difficult to get a primary and accurate data from these societies. Dehuti, that's what I wanted to tell you.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
That's very useful.
Yeah. So, is there any other question? Yeah.
Yeah. Anyone else, please? Would like to ask Rajan, raise a question. Okay. Assuming that no one else has any questions to ask, I suppose everyone is waiting to join the festivities. And I'm very glad to say that we have kind of completed all the 3 presentations much ahead of the time that we thought of. So wishing you all the best, for your papers. Please, as requested, submit your papers on time. We have very little time for review and then make the logistics, arrangement. Before I conclude, I'd like to introduce myself briefly. I am the convener of the conference, All India China Scholars Conference, for 3 years. Last year in the Manipal conference, it was the first iteration. This time, the second time, I'm being the convener, and my co-convener is Professor Arvind, who has not joined for some compelling reasons. I am faculty in IIM Indore, and I teach geopolitics and international relations and ethics and corporate social responsibility for the MBA students here. So assuming that none of you have any other questions, I would like to just conclude.
Venkat, 1 second.
Just 1 sec, man. 1 sec. Sorry to, interrupt. Mallika has asked, I wanted to ask, after incorporating the suggestions, can our word limit exceed 3,000 words? Yeah, Mallika, plus 200, 250 is okay. Maybe 500, including the references. But you see, we need to understand that we don't have reviewers who can go through 4,000 word articles in 1 week. That's the problem that we are living with. And this time the problem is bigger. We know in the earlier round of reviews, we had some 70 odd papers and we had to reach out to some 18, 20 reviewers. Each one, had at least 2 to 3 papers to be reviewed in 20, 25 days. And if justice has to be done to the review process, then, it's really very difficult and tough ask, given that almost all the reviewers have multiple commitments. So the idea is to come to the point and be precise and yet, make your argument as coherent and impactful as possible. So that's the idea behind 3,000 words. Of course, if you're doing a good work, you can always convert it into a 5,000 word essay or article and get it published in a good outlet. That's what I would say. Yes, ma'am, please step in.
No, I just wanted to say that, we are addressing here a bunch of young researchers. Yes. And they have not done their research about who the convener of this conference is. Then I don't think we have a very good indications out here. But no, I'm quite sure they know exactly who the conveners are, who you are in particular. You've been in constant correspondence with them. So just on behalf of the ICS, I would like to really express my gratitude to all the three speakers. Excellent presentations. I think between the three, they have covered the entire gamut of issues which I think our researchers would be needing to be writing their papers, covered very focused, in a very focused manner, but yet basics were cleared in a way in which I enjoyed it. Some of my basics were getting revived. So thank you all very much. It was very, very useful. I'm sure we will get good feedback from these researchers. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. So, Snigdha, ICS, can we, now say goodbye and till we meet again for the conference?
Yes, sir. Of course.
Yeah. So thanks a lot and happy Raksha Bandhan to all of you. And let's, meet the conference. I'm eagerly looking forward to see all of you here.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Bye-bye. Take care. Thanks a lot to all the three speakers again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thank
Bye.
you.